Chapter 215. Due to the Ji family's status in high city, be it in terms of wealth or power, they were all considered high class. Although Jin Wan showed off her abilities in the upper class, she had always believed in one principle. When she was outside or in front of people who did not understand her, the best way to protect herself was to not expose her wealth. After coming to T-City, she did not wish to bicker with these kinds of people too much. Another reason was to seek peace and quiet, preventing others from inquiring about all sorts of things. However, at this moment, her hand had only just touched the corner of the silver-threaded gown. When an employee by the side heard Ling Feifei's words, she subconsciously reached out and forcefully pushed Jin Wan's hand away. Jin Wan looked at this gown that was not considered high-end in her eyes. She then expressionlessly turned toward the employee. This gown is worn by a model. Isn't it placed here for the customer to see? If it can't be touched, why place it here? There's no touching sign on it. Who gave you the right to push away a customer? Your guts aren't small. The employees in this gown store had all gone through a series of professional training. This employee had truly been rash earlier. The moment she met Jin Wan's cold gaze, she immediately regretted her actions. But being scolded in front of everyone, the shop assistant was still a little displeased. She said, "Miss, this is the treasure of our shop. The price is at least $1 million. The one you touched just now is also the most expensive one in this series. Of course you can't touch it carelessly. If you break it or dirty it, you really can't afford to pay for it. This is an annual fashion show in Paris, France. It was just sent over from France and was only placed here this morning. We haven't had the time to put up the no touching sign." The employee's confidence naturally stemmed from Ling Feifei's words earlier. She was certain that Jin Wan, who was dressed simply, would not be able to afford it. When Ling Feifei heard these words, she immediately approached. She looked curiously at the silver-threaded gown and could not help but reach out to touch it. "This one is indeed very beautiful. Can I try it on?" The shop assistant, who had just said that they did not have time to hang up the no-touching sign, saw Ling Feifei's actions and did not stop her. Instead, she smiled even more cheerfully and said, "Yes, miss, please proceed to the VIP changing room inside. Our shop assistant will help you try it on." As he spoke, the employee no longer paid any attention to Jin Wan, who did not have the slightest sign of a famous brand. He eagerly pulled the other employees along to serve this Miss Ling, who looked like a tycoon at first glance. Bai Wei coldly glanced in Ling Feifei's direction and walked to Jin Wan's side to comfort her. "This young miss is probably born with her eyes on the top of her head. She's asking us to accompany her for a meal and to shop with her just to flaunt her wealth and let us see her illustrious family background. Ignore her." At this time, Jin Wan glanced at Feng Ling, who was looking at her. Feng Ling sat on the sofa and looked at her teasingly as if saying, "You can even tolerate this? That gown earlier, what do you think of it?" Jin Wan calmly withdrew her gaze, turning to look at Bai Wei by her side. Bai Wei raised her brows. "It's all right. It's indeed beautiful, but it's a little expensive. However, if it's a new model from the Paris fashion show, it's definitely worth the price. Do you plan on attending the 100th anniversary?" Jin Wan asked. "If time permits, I'll attend. It's rare for me to have a few months of time to return to my student days after entering the workforce. Back then, I didn't have the chance to attend such a 100th anniversary event. This time, I'll just treat it as a perfect ending to my pitifully simple student days." Bai Wei spoke with a smile. She looked at Jin Wan. "What about you?" Jin Wan did not reply. She calmly glanced at the other gowns around her and calmly said, "Speaking of which, that gown earlier is quite suitable for you. That gown is more mature and elegant. Ling Feifei's figure is too petite, and her aura is unable to support that gown. If you wear it, you'll definitely be stunning." Bai Wei heard these words and immediately chuckled. "Forget it. It's just a school anniversary. It's enough for me to dress appropriately and generously. Even if I become an executive in a foreign company, my annual salary would only be a few million. There's no need to spend so much money on a beauty contest. It's obvious that Ling Feifei has been spoiled rotten by her family. We're definitely not people from the same world as her." The two of them casually chatted, from the gown to the school anniversary, and from the school anniversary to Professor Lin's teaching methods. Not long later, Ling Feifei came out wearing the gown. It was as Jin Wan had said. Ling Feifei's figure was on the smaller side and could not support the elegance of this gown at all. Although she had purposely found a pair of 10-centimeter high heels to wear, making her appear taller, she was still unable to support it. "How is it? Does it look good?" Ling Feifei stood in front of them and turned around proudly. "I plan to buy this one." Bai Wei smiled but did not speak. She did not say that it looked good, nor did she say that it did not look good. Jean Wan only raised her brows. She did not speak, but her gaze spoke volumes. In truth, her attitude was the same as Bai Wei's. It was just that she clearly did not feel that it was good. She was just too lazy to say anything. However, the employee who had pushed Jean Wan earlier intentionally observed Jean Wan's expression. Ling Feifei also intentionally looked toward Jean Wan when the employee suddenly spoke up. "Miss Ling, it's best if you don't ask them. Some people are born to be envious of others. There's no meaning in asking like this. Right now, some people's expressions are clearly saying that the grapes are sour. They definitely won't say that it looks good." That's right, that's right. The other employee, in order to quickly sell this most expensive gown and earn a generous salary, also chimed in. "You can't afford it yourself, but you don't want others to buy it? What kind of gaze is that? It's as though Miss Ling's beautiful gown has pierced your eyes. Miss Ling, what kind of friends do you have? They're just roommates. They can't be considered friends." Ling Feifei stood there with a pleased expression, allowing the two employees to praise her as they pleased. She spun around twice and said, "This gown is indeed not bad. Are there any other styles?" "If you really like it, buy it," Jean Wan said indifferently. "Let's go take a look at the other floors of the department store. Call us when you're done." After speaking, Jean Wan and Bai Wei exchanged glances and turned to leave. Chapter 216. She truly could not stand Jean Wan's nonchalant attitude even though she clearly had no money. She directly mocked and ridiculed her. Jean Wan's footsteps paused. She abruptly shifted her gaze to the arrogant shop assistant from the corner of her eyes. Feng Ling had already stood up. Earlier she was preparing to head out with her. Right now, her gaze was playful as she watched Jean Wan. She then glanced at the reckless shop assistant and felt that a good show was about to begin. Finally, Jean Wan abruptly turned around and coldly glanced at the shop assistant behind her. "Where's your shop manager? Why are you looking for the manager?" The shop assistant did not seem to be afraid of her reporting them. She continued to sneer and say, "Our manager isn't here to serve idlers like you. What can you do even if you call the manager over?" However, due to Jean Wan's request to see the manager, the shop manager, who was originally watching the commotion from the side, had no choice but to approach from the cashier. "Miss, I'm sorry. May I ask what you need?" The manager looked at her with a smile that did not reach her eyes. There was not a hint of respect for the customer in her eyes. Instead, because she had seen the entire situation, she knew that she did not have much ability and would not be able to cause any trouble. "I have a complaint. Your shop's sales assistant has spoken rudely to the customer." First, she used her hands to push the customer. Now she is using her words to provoke the customer. Jean Wan's face was expressionless. Her expression was exquisite and cold as she added. She even had the intention to compare the two customers who entered at the same time, elevating one and belittling the other. This kind of snobbish behavior is one more crime. The manager immediately laughed. "Miss, it's not that I want to criticize you, but earlier I saw everything with my own eyes. Our shop assistant didn't do anything. This gown is indeed not something anyone can touch. If you were like Miss Ling and could afford it, we naturally wouldn't say anything. However, you clearly can't afford it, yet you insisted on touching it. The shop assistant was afraid that you would dirty it and ruin it, so she subconsciously pushed you. She didn't hit it hard, so why do you have to be so calculative? Besides, our shop assistant's judgment of people isn't wrong. Miss, there's nothing eye-catching on you. With one look, I can tell that you're just an ordinary student. You want to hug Miss Ling's thigh and accompany her to shop, but you have to be clear about your own status. You don't even have the right to touch something that she can try on. This is life. You don't have her money or power, so you're destined to be divided. What do you have to be unhappy about?" As the manager spoke, she examined Jean Wan from head to toe. She estimated the price of her clothes, shoes, bag and other items. She could not see the logo and could only see that they were from a few international brands of them. However, they were not. Miss could tell that the brand of them, of her, of them, of not there, of them, of Ling, but they were not. Could it be that everyone in this shop is snobbish? Bai Wei could not stand it any longer. She coldly reprimanded while frowning by Jean Wan's side. However, Jean Wan only smiled mildly. She reached out to block Bai Wei, who was about to stand up for her. At the same time, she picked up her phone and turned to make a call. The employees and managers, including Ling Feifei, who was about to change out of that gown to try on other gowns, all looked toward Jean Wan as though they were watching a show. Call her? Who could she call? Could it be that because she was too poor to afford a gown, she was going to angrily call the police like a junior high school student after being ridiculed by the employees? Even the Bureau of Industry and Commerce could not do anything about this, much less the police. How ignorant and childish. The employees sneered, fighting to change into Ling Feifei's gown. After Ling Feifei changed into another gown and came out, the employees carefully tidied up the most expensive silver gown in the store and put it on the model. In a short 10 minutes, the employees surrounded Ling Feifei, one after another, trying to persuade her to buy a gown here today. At this moment, the manager in the store suddenly saw the figures of several people in charge of the department store appear by the door. She looked at the several big shots dressed in suits with solemn expressions. Seeing them suddenly push open the door, the manager was surprised and rushed forward to welcome them. Xiao Qin? Xiao Zhang? Why do you have the time to personally patrol the store? Is the department store going to start a fire inspection again? Or is there some big shot coming to patrol the department store? If there's any situation, you could have just given us a call. How could we trouble the two of you to personally come? The manager walked over with a face full of smiles, but for some reason, her heart began to beat like a drum. This department store was the center of High City's G Corporation's chain department store in the country. It was also the largest G Corporation department store in the country aside from High City. Usually, these managers and directors would never personally come to patrol the employees. These were all big shots who sat high up in the department store's air-conditioned office. Today they all appeared at the same time. The manager subconsciously felt that something was wrong. Otherwise, she would not have been able to invite them even if she wanted to. Seeing that the manager had already gone forward to welcome them, and seeing that it really was Xiao Qin and Xiao Zhang, the employees subconsciously rushed over to welcome them. Their faces were full of smiles as they welcomed them politely. In an instant, Ling Feifei, who was originally surrounded by a group of people, was suddenly left alone. Ling Feifei had just put on the second gown. It had a zipper at the back, but the zipper was only half pulled up. She angrily called for them to come back and help her pull it up, but after calling out twice, no one paid her any attention. Xiao Qin and Xiao Zhang were the direct managers of this department store. They were also the managers of High City's G Corporation and were the general manager and director of this department store. Normally, they did not have the opportunity to meet them. It would not be an exaggeration to say that they were their immediate superiors. The other person who walked in after them was the brand manager of this VIP gown store. He was the person who could decide the life and death of all the employees in this store. Xiao Qin, Xiao Zhang, you. The manager saw that they walked in with straight faces and did not even glance at them. Her unease grew. Thinking back to the phone call she had made earlier, the manager subconsciously glanced in Jinwan's direction. There were so many important people here. It couldn't be that they were really called here by her phone call, right? From Miss Ling's attitude, it was unlikely that she had such an ability. But for these immediate superiors to suddenly come personally, it could not be a coincidence. However, under the shocked gazes of everyone in the store, these immediate superiors suddenly approached Jinwan. Chapter 217. When the people in the store heard these words, their legs immediately softened. What Miss G? The employee who had pushed Jinwan earlier also looked toward the expressionless Jinwan with a dumbfounded expression. Even Ling Feifei, who was struggling with the zipper of her gown, abruptly raised her eyes in shock. Wasn't Jinwan just the person in charge of a small studio? Why was the boss of a chain department store under the G Corporation treating her like a little eunuch seeing the Empress Dowager? Xiao Qin and Xiao Zhang eagerly handed their name cards over to Jinwan. Miss G, we are the people in charge of this department store. If you have any problems in T-City that you need our help with, you can contact us at any time. Our phones will definitely be on for you 24 hours a day. Facing these two, Jinwan did not smile politely. Instead, she mildly glanced at the name cards they handed over. Her expression was cold and emotionless as she said, "Deal with the problems in your department store first." Her actions of not giving them any face not only did not cause Xiao Qin and Xiao Zhang to be unhappy, it even caused the two who were usually high and mighty to nod their heads repeatedly. They all agreed, "Yes, yes, yes. All right. We'll deal with it immediately." Who would dare to slight the G Corporation's true heiress with her presence? This entire department store belonged to their G family. Miss G, please take a seat. Please take a seat first. Leave this to us. Xiao Qin respectfully invited Jinwan to sit on the sofa by the side. He then indicated for the employee to bring some drinks over. Although the employee did not know the identity of this so-called Miss G, she was so frightened that she immediately poured a cup of coffee and brought it over. Feng Ling stood by the side, the corners of her lips seemingly curving up. Although Bai Wei was surprised, she also felt that the student that Professor Lin accepted was definitely not simple. Perhaps Jin Wan was usually too low profile. However, on Ling Feifei's side, there was a sudden "kacha" sound. The zipper on the back of her gown was abruptly torn due to her clenching her teeth and pulling it with great force. Jin Wan held onto the coffee cup, lowering her head to slowly blow at the steam wafting out. Through the thick white fog, she could see the various expressions on Ling Feifei's and the employees' faces. She also saw Ling Feifei standing awkwardly because her zipper was damaged. She glared at her with an ugly expression. However, because she was unsure of Jin Wan's identity, she did not know where to place her complicated gaze. Then Jin Wan exchanged a look with the supervisor who had already sensed that something was wrong and turned pale. The moment she met Jin Wan's gaze, the supervisor's back stiffened. She wanted to ask CEO Chen and CEO Zhang who exactly she was, but just as she was about to speak, she suddenly received CEO Chen and CEO Zhang's glare. She was so frightened that her legs turned numb. "You again." Director Zhang suddenly reprimanded the supervisor. "We received a report last time saying that the gowns in your shop are not in line with the brand's standard price. You even said that the manager of your store was too arrogant, so angry that some customers directly reported you to the higher-ups. You were the one who went to our office to write a letter of self-reflection and a letter of guarantee, promising to rectify the demeanor of the employees in the future and to cooperate with the change in the prices of the brands. It's only been 2 months and your store is actually in trouble again." The supervisor's complexion was ashen. She wanted to explain but was scolded back down by CEO Chen. By the side, the brand manager also reprimanded the supervisor and the employees. At the same time, he put on a fawning expression, trying to salvage their brand's image. He did not want these small characters to cause their brand to be removed from this large department store. However, the result was that this store was about to be closed down due to damaging the image of the department store. The G Corporation department store would no longer cooperate with this French luxury gown brand. They were ordered to clear away all the goods within 2 days, vacate the store, and never renew the contract or cooperate with them. They never expected that it would cause such a serious consequence. The supervisor and the employees who were about to lose their jobs also faced the consequences of having their wages deducted and being fined. Even the brand manager who had followed them here panicked. They knew that the problem lay with Jin Wan and wanted to plead for her. However, Jin Wan only sat quietly on the sofa, not even glancing at them. The brand manager was responsible for the image and marketing management of this French luxury gown brand in the entire province. Seeing that the largest department store in T-City was about to remove their brand, he angrily scolded the supervisor and the others. "What are you waiting for? You've affected our brand's image and caused such a terrible consequence. Do you think deducting our wages can solve the problem? If there's no way to salvage the situation, the brand's legal staff will come to you within 3 days. Because of your stupid behavior, it has led to such a serious consequence. If the brand's legal department doesn't sue you until you go bankrupt, you won't be able to report back. A bunch of idiots. Hurry up and apologize to Miss G. Think of a way to plead for her. Salvage the brand's loss." Hearing that not only would they be fined, but they would also be sued by the brand's legal staff, the supervisor and employees who were already tense rushed to Jin Wan's side in fright, apologizing profusely. At this moment, the supervisor and employees' attitudes were so servile that they wished they could directly kneel down. The supervisor was the first to step forward to hold Jin Wan's hand, wanting to put herself in her shoes and plead for leniency. Just as the supervisor's hand was about to touch Jin Wan's arm, Feng Ling raised her leg and kicked over a pot of boiling water on the coffee table. The boiling water splashed onto the supervisor's arm, causing her to cry out in pain. She took a large step back, staring in fear at Jin Wan, who remained seated quietly on the sofa with a calm attitude. Seeing this scene, Bai Wei, who was standing by the side, finally realized that Feng Ling's relationship with Jin Wan was not shallow. No wonder she had always felt that someone like Feng Ling was always protecting Jin Wan. From the looks of it, Jin Wan's identity was indeed extraordinary. Even though she was not clear of Jin Wan's identity, she suddenly had a premonition that Ling Feifei's fate would not be good in the future. After the supervisor was scalded, she took several steps back in a panic. Several employees also approached to plead for leniency. Feng Ling's expression was cold as she was about to stop them from approaching Jin Wan. All of a sudden, CEO Chen and CEO Zhang could no longer watch on. They walked over and berated, "What are you all standing here for? There's no way Miss G will listen to your nonsense. Look for the brand's manager and legal staff to resolve the matter." The mall's security guards were sent over to pull away the employees who were kneeling and begging for mercy to prevent them from disturbing Jin Wan. Chapter 218. That's right, that gown. Jin Wan pointed at the silver gown that the model was wearing. Before your brand leaves this mall, sell this gown to me. How much is it? The manager and the employees stared at her in shock. They then watched as Jin Wan took out a gold card and handed it to CEO Zhang. I want that gown. Help me wrap it up. Thank you. Be careful not to wrinkle it. She actually asked CEO Zhang to run an errand for her. However, CEO Zhang appeared as though he had received a reward. He immediately ordered for the gown Jin Wan wanted to be carefully removed from the model's body. He then ordered for the gown to be wrapped up and delivered to her. Miss Ji, the bill for this gown can be transferred to our mall. You don't have to pay. CEO Zhang returned and placed the card in Jin Wan's hand. Jin Wan calmly glanced at CEO Zhang. She gave him face and accepted the card and the gown. However, in the blink of an eye, she handed the gown to Bai Wei, who was behind her. Sister Bai Wei, this gown suits your skin and aura. It's for you. Jin Wan's attitude was courteous and matter-of-factly. In an instant, not only was Bai Wei shocked, the others present all had different expressions. Ling Feifei stood by the door. She almost crushed her teeth from gritting them. She was clearly the one who tried on this gown first. She was the one who saw it first. But Jin Wan actually bought it. She even gifted it to Bai Wei right in front of her. Jin Wan must be doing this on purpose. After the mall and the store's problems were settled, CEO Qin and CEO Zhang came to ask if Jin Wan had anything else to say. Jin Wan simply said a few words and left. She did not wish to stay here and deal with these people. The weekend wasn't a good time to be wasted here. Seeing that Jin Wan and the others had left, Ling Feifei was afraid that these people would pursue the matter of the zipper. Since there was a problem with the store, no one would think of her for now. Ling Feifei took advantage of the chaos to run out and catch up to them. Jin Wan, stop right there. Ling Feifei followed behind and called out. She then quickly walked over. When she arrived before Jin Wan, she looked her up and down several times. She glared at her unhappily and asked, "Who exactly are you? How can the person in charge of a small studio invite the general manager and director of such a big shopping mall?" Jin Wan looked straight at her. Her indifferent gaze was focused on the carefully concealed unwillingness and embarrassment on Ling Feifei's face. She calmly said, "It's just studying at T University for 3 months. Is status and family background really that important? Are you sure you want to know the reason? Why don't you rank your roommates as well?" Ling Feifei was momentarily speechless. She could only glare at her in secret. "But it's wrong of you to lie." Jin Wan could not be bothered to talk nonsense with her. She frowned and said, "Do you still want to see the gown? If you don't want to watch, then go back. I'm tired. The wind is really strong today. It's indeed not good weather for shopping. If you want to continue shopping, you can do so on your own. We'll return to T University first," Bai Wei added. Ling Feifei abruptly turned to look at Bai Wei and then at the gown in her hands that was worth more than 1,000,000 yuan. Even now, she did not dare to imagine that a gown worth more than 1,000,000 yuan would be so generously gifted to Bai Wei. Jin Wan. Ling Feifei suddenly angrily said, "Your surname is Ji. That department store earlier belongs to Hai Cheng's Ji Group. Don't tell me you have some relationship with the Ji family?" Jin Wan calmly glanced at her and did not speak. She was about to flag a taxi to return to T University. Ling Feifei continued, "You're a relative of the Ji family? You were able to open a studio in Haicheng. Don't tell me it's because you're hugging onto the Ji family's thigh? Otherwise, how could there be a place for you in a place like Haicheng where every inch of land is worth its weight in gold?" Feng Ling could no longer watch on. She rubbed her brows by the side. She was really an idiot who deserved a beating. That night, Bai Wei and Jin Wan headed to the bathroom in the dormitory to shower. When they came out to change, they encountered each other in the changing room. Bai Wei asked as she changed, "Jin Wan, you're the daughter of Hai Cheng's Ji family, aren't you?" Jin Wan's actions did not change. She then picked up the hairdryer and turned to look at her. She smiled slightly and used a voice that only she could hear to say, "You can see through it, but don't say it out loud." As expected. It was clear that Jin Wan was just trying to keep a low profile. Ling Feifei refused to believe that Jin Wan's family background was good and would rather believe what she believed. She blindly placed the words Jin Wan's small studio together. But if she thought about it carefully, Jin Wan should be the young miss of the Ji Corporation. Hearing the words "you can see through it but don't say it out loud," Bai Wei, who had been in the workplace for many years, instantly understood and nodded. It was the weekend. It was already the third week after Jinwan's birthday. T University's business management classes were almost halfway through. Previously, Jinwan had brought all of her luggage to the dormitory. However, she had left a power adapter for her laptop in the condo's study. She had forgotten to bring it along. After using the computer last night, Jinwan searched for it for a long time and recalled that she had left it in the condo. Taking advantage of the weekend, she returned with Feng Ling to retrieve it. By the time they reached the condo, it was already evening. All the floors of the condo were already lit up. Mrs. Mo. Feng Ling walked behind Jinwan and softly said, "I previously contacted Shinmu. He said that Mr. Mo was in Japan for a business trip last week and should have returned in the past 2 days. You and Mr. Mo haven't contacted each other for almost a month. Are you not planning to take the initiative to give him a call?" Jinwan's footsteps paused. If Feng Ling had not told her, she would not have known that Mo Jingshan was in Japan last week. After so long, Jinwan had grown too accustomed to being by Mo Jingshan's side. Habit was a scary thing. It was so scary that she thought Mo Jingshan would always be by her side. However, it was only today that she realized that if one day Mo Jingshan did not want her anymore, or if Mo Jingshan chose to disappear from her life, she would not be able to find him. That man's position was too high. As long as he was willing, he could be very, very close to her. If he was unwilling, he could be very, very far away. Jinwan did not speak and directly entered the condo. When she reached her floor and stepped out of the elevator, she was shocked to find that the door to her condo was actually open. Warm light seeped out from the half-closed door. Feng Ling's face lit up. She was about to ask if Mr. Mo had come when Jinwan, who had been pretending to be calm, opened the door and quickly walked in. Chapter 219. Jinwan pushed open the door and entered, looking at the bright lights in the living room. Feng Ling hesitated outside the door. Since Mr. Mo was here, did it mean that she didn't have to accompany Jinwan tonight? After hesitating for a moment, she decided not to go in. This apartment was really big. The distance from the door to the bedroom was not close, but the bedroom door was closed and there was no light inside. Aside from the living room, only the kitchen light was on. Why was it the kitchen? Would Mo Jingshan really come? Jinwan felt an inexplicable feeling of homesickness. She had already prepared a lot of things to say. She wanted to say that she had always believed in him. When she said those words, it wasn't because she doubted their relationship and marriage. She was just stuck there for a moment. She directly said what she wanted to say, but she ignored the trust between them that had always existed. These days she stared at her phone in a daze every day. Her hand always paused on the call button, but she could not press it. Had he finally calmed down? Had he finally come? Jinwan stood outside the kitchen for a while. She wanted to go in but was afraid that it would be too sudden. She prepared a plan in her mind before stepping in. However, the moment she entered the kitchen, she saw an auntie in her 50s standing by the refrigerator, holding a shopping bag with a supermarket logo in one hand and opening the refrigerator door with the other. Jinwan's footsteps paused, and the glimmer of hope in her eyes immediately dissipated. Her hands hidden in her sleeves clenched tightly and then loosened, as though there was something she wanted to hold but could not. The auntie in front of the refrigerator heard footsteps and turned back to see Jinwan. She was surprised and then asked eagerly and kindly, "Hello, are you Miss Ji?" Jinwan restrained her emotions and said, "Yes, and you are?" The auntie immediately smiled again. "Hello, Miss Ji. I'm Mr. Mo's private nanny hired more than a month ago. I'm responsible for cleaning your room every 2 days and changing all the ingredients in the kitchen to the freshest every day. I noticed that the things in the refrigerator have not been touched for a long time, and you haven't used the various ingredients bought in the past month. After all, Mr. Mo has paid for them long ago, so I still come on time every 2 days." Feng Ling heard the conversation inside from the outside. She didn't hear Mr. Mo's voice and felt it was strange. Was the person inside not Mr. Mo? She quickly walked in and saw Jinwan standing in front of the kitchen door. She appeared normal, but her back was clearly tense. Feng Ling stepped forward hesitantly. When she raised her eyes to see the auntie inside, she instantly understood what was going on. No wonder this place is always clean. It turns out that people often come here to clean up. Feng Ling said in a low voice and then turned to see that Jinwan was also smiling politely, but the smile did not reach her eyes. It was obvious that he was disappointed. "By the way, Miss Ji, I buy these things every 2 days. Are you not used to them, or have you not been staying here recently? I see that many of the things in your bathroom have not been used in a long time." The auntie closed the fridge door and turned around to ask, "If you're not used to it, you can give me a list. In the future, I'll only buy what you like." No, it's true that I haven't lived here for a long time. Jinwan's tone was flat, and she lowered her eyes to look at the clean and spotless floor. Oh, no wonder. The auntie nodded. It's such a waste to keep the things you buy. If Miss G doesn't come to stay in the condominium, do you need me to send all the food I buy to T University in the future? Are you staying in the dormitory right now? It's not convenient to cook in the dormitory, and the food is also very casual. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Jinwan calmly said, Auntie, in the future just come here on time to clean up. There's no need to buy anything. But Mr. Mo gave me a lot of money. It's fine. I just need to clean up. Miss G, then this money? Seeing that Jinwan was not in a good mood, Feng Ling directly spoke up. Just do whatever Miss G says. If she says there's no need to buy, then there's no need to buy. The auntie was stunned. She had received so much money, but in the end she only came to clean up. She truly felt uneasy. However, seeing that they insisted, she could only nod. All right then. I'll give you my phone number. In these 3 months, if you need anything, feel free to call me. Jinwan nodded and did not speak anymore. She turned to leave. Feng Ling received the note from the auntie. After glancing at the phone number, she allowed the auntie to continue cleaning. She then turned to look at Jinwan, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows in the living room. She was silent for a moment and was about to go over to speak to her. However, the auntie in the kitchen rarely saw someone here and kept trying to find a topic to talk about. Feng Ling stood where she was and casually replied. Half an hour later, the auntie left. Jinwan was still standing by the window. Mrs. Mo, you came back to get the computer accessories, right? Feng Ling spoke up to break the silence. Do you still remember where you left them? I'll go get them for you lest you forget when you leave later. In the study. All right, I'll go get them. Feng Ling glanced at her again before turning to head to the study. In the study she found the things Jinwan wanted and walked out. At some point in time, Jinwan, who had been standing by the window, had already squatted down. Jinwan squatted by the window and did not make a single sound. Mo? Feng Ling was about to speak when she hesitated for 2 seconds because of the scene before her. She suddenly took out her phone and secretly took a photo of Jinwan from this angle. She took a photo of Jinwan's desolate appearance as she squatted by the window. From this angle, she could not see Jinwan's expression. She could only see a lock of hair hanging by her cheeks. Her back view was thin and quiet. Like a child who had been abandoned by an adult by the side of the road, she did not know what to do. After taking the photo, Feng Ling stared at it for a moment and found Mo Jingshan's private number on her phone. She directly sent the photo to him. After sending it, only 2 seconds later, she saw the words read on the back of the photo. She then placed her phone back and walked to the window to accompany Jinwan as she squatted down. Mrs. Mo, what do you want to do the most right now? Jinwan heard Feng Ling's words and turned to look at the short-haired woman by her side. She pursed her lips. I don't know. My mind is a little empty. Perhaps I can listen to some stories or do something to divert my attention and make myself feel better. Or drinking is not a bad choice. The ancients said that getting drunk can cure 1,000 sorrows. I can give it a try. This was the first time in a month that Jinwan had taken the initiative to admit the pain in her heart. Chapter 220. High City, Mo Corporation. The office door opened. Mo Jingshan had just stepped out when he heard the sound of his phone ringing. CEO Mo, our partner in Hong Kong, has been secretly making some moves. As you expected, they want to use the cooperation with Mo Corporation to be the title sponsor, and then use this opportunity to secretly communicate with other investors. Shenmu walked out of the assistant's office with quick steps. He approached him and reported in a low voice. Mo Jingshan glanced at him and picked up his phone at the same time. He glanced at the screen and saw that it was a message from Feng Ling. The man's slender fingers slid across the screen, and a photo immediately popped up. Then Shenmu saw Mo Jingshan suddenly stop in front of the office door. He didn't know what he saw on his phone. Shenmu was about to step forward to take a curious look, but before he could see clearly, Mo Jingshan's phone screen had already darkened. What did you say earlier? Mo Jingshan asked. His voice was neither cold nor warm, and it was impossible to tell what he was feeling. Recently, not only was CEO Mo incredibly busy, but he was also traveling all over the country. His originally cold personality had become even more unfathomable. Even Shenmu, who was usually very close to him, had no choice but to speak more carefully. Earlier, I said that the partner in Hong Kong is relying on the cooperation with Mo Corporation and is currently using this opportunity to attract investments from all over the world. They are all using our company's name to attract investments. You've always been dissatisfied with this partner, and you've long expected that they will be very disobedient in private. Should we take this opportunity to head to Hong Kong to intercept those investments, in case it affects MO Corporation's reputation? MO Jingshan's expression was as heavy as water, and his gaze was cold and dark. Send the vice CEO to Hong Kong. You'll go with him. You've been paying attention to this matter. Aren't you going personally now? Shenmu was surprised. He had thought that CEO Mo had not been staying in High City recently and would directly head over to Hong Kong this time. Mo Jingshan turned on his phone again, glanced at the photo on the screen, and then instantly turned it off. Book me the earliest flight to T-City. The man's ink-like deep eyes looked toward the partition outside the conference room. The direction the window was facing, 1,000 miles away, was the location of T-City. In the condominium in T-City, Feng Ling took a can of drink from the fridge and handed it to Jin Wan. Don't even think about drinking wine. Come drink something. Jin Wan changed from squatting to hugging her knees and leaning against the window. Seeing the drink Feng Ling brought over, she smiled faintly and took it. She opened it and took a sip. Jin Wan gently squeezed the can in her hand and said in a low and clear voice, "At first I thought you were a difficult person to approach, but now I realize that a hard block of wood like you actually has a warm side to you. I feel that you are actually quite good at taking care of people, but why do you always appear so distant and distant?" Nguyen Mo Feng Ling also had a can of drink in. She sat beside Jin Wan and sat. She Ling Mo and took a Feng Mo Ling Mo emojis Ling. If you want to tell me, of course I'm willing to listen. It's a good thing that you can help me divert my attention. Otherwise, I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep tonight. Jin Wan leaned her back against the window. Although she was smiling, her eyes were clearly depressed. Feng Ling was silent for a moment. After a moment she said lightly, "I'm an orphan." Jin Wan did not reply. "When I was very young no one cared about me. In those years, the United States did not care much about a homeless child like me. Later I met a kind couple. Although they did not have the ability to adopt me, they sent me to a very good welfare home in Los Angeles." Feng Ling's voice was very low, as though this was the first time she was talking to someone about herself. When she analyzed her past, she was still hesitant. She spoke slowly, "The orphanage is not bad, but my personality is not very sociable. I don't like those children who cry all day or act obedient just to eat a piece of meat. So, when I was 13 I sneaked out and disguised myself as a man to sneak into Xi's training base. At that time I coincidentally saved a manager of the base, so I was able to sneak in. Later, during puberty, my body was constantly developing. Every day, I wrapped a cloth around my chest and wore loose training clothes to barely cover my body shape that was different from that of a man's. In addition, I was a very indifferent person to begin with. Other than a few of my close friends, I didn't have much contact with others, and I didn't act like a woman, so no one ever found out. So, I was always like those men, doing the same tasks and undergoing the same high-intensity training. Later, because of my outstanding training results in all aspects, I gradually gained a foothold in the training base." Hearing this, Jin Wan suddenly smiled. "Then, how were you discovered? You're not disguised as a man." Feng Ling's gaze faltered. After a few seconds of silence, her tone suddenly turned cold. She said coldly, 3 years ago, I was discovered in a field mission. You've hidden for so many years without being discovered. Who is it? Who is so capable?" Jin Wan smiled and held her chin with one hand, turning to look at Feng Ling by her side. To be honest, if Feng Ling cut her hair shorter and wore loose clothes, she would indeed look more heroic than many girls of her age. Nanheng. Feng Ling clearly did not particularly want to mention this name. Jin Wan was not surprised by this answer. However, when she heard this answer, Jin Wan suddenly took a deep look at Feng Ling. "Last time, during Nanheng's birthday, we invited you to sit in the private room, but you refused to enter. Was it because of him?" At this point, Feng Ling did not wish to continue speaking. She only glanced at Jin Wan. "Has your attention been diverted by me? Don't worry about whether my attention has been diverted or not. If you get stuck halfway through your story, I'm afraid I won't be able to sleep tonight. There's no continuation of the story. Not now and not in the future." Feng Ling's expression suddenly became much more indifferent. She stood up and glanced at the time. "Are you planning to stay here tonight or go back to the dormitory? It's getting late. If we don't go back soon, we'll have to go to bed." Jin Wan also glanced at the time. She turned to look out the window. There were tens of thousands of lights, but this condominium was strangely quiet. "Let's go back to the dormitory." Jin Wan stood up and used her hand to knock against her slightly numb legs. She did not speak anymore and directly walked out. Seeing that Jin Wan had left so decisively, it was clear that she did not plan to stay any longer in this condominium. It seemed like no matter what story she told, it would not be able to soothe her mood. Chapter 221. Jin Wan rushed back to the dormitory before bedtime. Right now she could not stay idle. Her mood would be stifled, so the moment she returned, she rushed to take a shower. After showering, she came out to change her clothes. All of a sudden, she saw Bai Wei bring over the gown she had previously gifted her and place it by the cabinet. What is it? Jin Wan turned to look at her. I've placed it on your bed several times before, but you've always taken it back. Bai Wei said, this gown is too expensive. I still can't accept it. It's enough for you to dampen Ling Feifei's spirit that time. In any case, she hasn't had much of a temper after being suppressed by you recently. This gown should still be returned to you. It's not that I'm trying to dampen anyone's spirit, but this gown really suits your temperament. Jin Wan turned around, picking up her own clothes and handing the box of gown back to her. There's no need to return it to me. In the future, I might be able to cooperate with your company in other areas. This can be considered a revolutionary relationship that we've cultivated in T University. There's no need to treat me like an outsider. Hearing these words, Bai Wei could not help but glance at Jin Wan. I don't know much about Haiqing. I only know that the Ji family is one of the 4 largest families in Haiqing, right? Jin Wan smiled mildly. You can say that. In recent years, our family's business hasn't been doing so well. I don't think we can be ranked among the 4 largest families. You're really modest, that's the truth. Furthermore, none of the students that Professor Lin accepted this time are ordinary. Everyone carries the future hopes of their respective companies. There's nothing to compare. Just focus on getting through the next 3 months. That's true. In the future, we'll see each other frequently in the business world. It's better to keep a low profile. The two chatted as they returned to the dormitory. When they entered, Ling Feifei was wearing a facial mask and doing yoga exercises in the dormitory. Of the 4 people in the dormitory, Ling Feifei was definitely the best when it came to skincare and maintenance. Bai Wei was second. Bai Wei was already 25 years old. It was necessary for her to take care of her skin daily, but she was not as exaggerated as Ling Feifei. On the other hand, Jin Wan and Feng Ling were the type who, after washing their faces, would sometimes forget to apply toner on their skin and lie down to sleep. However, Jin Wan's skin was too good. Even though she was usually so casual, her skin was still better than Ling Feifei's, who applied tens of thousands of skincare products every day. Even Feng Ling, who lived a rough life, had whiter skin than Ling Feifei. Seeing that Jin Wan and Bai Wei had entered together, Ling Feifei turned to glance at them while pressing down on her thighs. Gifting a gown worth 1,000,000 yuan is really different. You even want to take a shower together? Bai Wei glanced at her. Are you unhappy because someone took your love away from you? Back in that store when you were facing the bosses of those shopping malls, where did your toughness go? Why didn't I just swipe my card to buy it? Now, he felt unhappy just thinking about it, so he came to find trouble again? Can't you just stop for a day? Ling Feifei abruptly turned to glare at her. Before she could speak, Jin Wan calmly asked, that day when you tried on the other gown, did you tear the zipper of that gown? Ling Feifei's expression faltered. She immediately shifted her gaze away awkwardly and did not look at them. She angrily sat down by the bed and removed her mask. That gown wasn't cheap, right? Bai Wei coldly smiled as she glanced at Ling Feifei. Ling Feifei abruptly glared at Bai Wei. Why do you care if it was cheap or not? In any case, that branded store has already been removed from the shopping malls. They don't have the right to continue selling there. So what if it's damaged? In any case, they don't dare to ask me for money. Their brand's legal department won't be able to pin the blame on me. Besides, it was so chaotic back then. Who can be sure if it was me who damaged it, or if it was those unlucky employees who helped me put on the gown? Even if you want to testify, it's useless. It's been so many days, but they still haven't come knocking. Who told you it's just words? Feng Ling, who was about to fall asleep on the bed, suddenly spoke up. Ling Feifei's expression faltered. She turned to see Feng Ling waving the phone screen in her direction. The recording function, which had lasted for a full 2 minutes, had been stopped. In other words, everything Ling Feifei had said earlier had been recorded. What are you doing? Hurry and delete it. Ling Feifei panicked. She stood up and rushed over to snatch her phone away. It was not that she could not afford it, but she did not want to embarrass herself. She had already embarrassed herself in front of Jin Wan for the past few days. If she were to really be called back to the shopping malls for compensation, Where would her face go? Feng Ling casually tossed the phone onto the bed. Her gaze was indifferent as she glanced at Ling Feifei, who was pouncing over. She sat up and casually snapped her hands together. The crisp sound of bones crisscrossing could be heard. Ling Feifei immediately stood stiffly by her bedside, not daring to move. Her hands froze in midair as she glared angrily at the indifferent and cold Feng Ling. Delete that recording. Otherwise, I'll go find Professor Lin tomorrow and tell him that you were recording in your dormitory. You're violating my right to freedom of speech. Go ahead. I don't mind showing the recording to the professor tomorrow. Feng Ling no longer looked at her. She casually stretched out a leg on the bed, causing Ling Feifei to take a small step back in fright. Seeing that Feng Ling was about to lie down and sleep, Ling Feifei glared at the phone she had already tossed under the pillow. She was so angry that her teeth were itching. Jinwan returned to the bedside and picked up the phone. Feng Ling, remember to send me a copy of the recording just in case. Hearing this, Ling Feifei abruptly turned to glare at Jinwan. Before she could scold her, Bai Wei also spoke up. Send me a copy as well. Ling Feifei abruptly exploded in anger. She casually grabbed a mirror from the bedside table and smashed it harshly onto the ground. In less than a minute, the dormitory management auntie rushed to the door and knocked, scolding, "What time is it? Who caused such a huge commotion?" Ling Feifei. The next day Ling Feifei was still angry. She took the opportunity when Jinwan went to fetch some hot water in the morning to hand over her own water bottle. "Since you're going anyway, isn't your other hand empty? Help me fetch a bottle as well." Ling Feifei's attitude was arrogant and bossy. In any case, she was unwilling to be suppressed by Jinwan's aura. Jinwan did not even look at her and had already left. Ling Feifei abruptly stood up and was about to force her own water bottle into Jinwan's hand. However, the moment she stood up, Feng Ling, who was passing by, kicked the empty water bottle in her hand onto the ground. "What are you doing?" Ling Feifei saw that Jinwan had already left without looking back. She then glanced at the broken water bottle on the ground and abruptly raised her eyes to glare at Feng Ling. "If you want to drink water, pour it yourself. If you want to fetch water, go fetch it yourself. Who are you hoping to serve you?" After kicking her, Feng Ling turned and sat down, her tone cold and disdainful. "What are you doing? You've been protecting Jinwan ever since you came here. Don't tell me you're the bodyguard she hired? You won't let her do anything." Ling Feifei was angry. She really could not stay in this dormitory any longer. "You're right. I'm her bodyguard." Feng Ling narrowed her eyes and sneered. Chapter 222. The next afternoon, there were many cars parked outside T University. None of them looked simple. The students were whispering among themselves, saying that the 2-century-old libraries in T University were about to be renovated. The person who came today was the CEO of a well-known company in the country. He was going to invest in the renovation of T University's library. In the past, investors like this would eventually become honorary principals. This time was likely no exception. If the investment was successful, he would definitely become an honorary principal. After all, T University's library had a history of close to 100 years. Regardless of whether it was tens of millions or hundreds of millions of books, or the ancient building, if it needed to be renovated, it would require a huge investment. This was not something an ordinary company could afford. "Hey, have you guys heard? The person who's going to renovate T University's library seems to be from High City." "High City?" High City is one of the top cities in the country. There are indeed many rich people there. Many well-known corporations in the country have their headquarters in High City. It's no surprise that the other party has such a strong financial strength. Indeed. I wonder which company's CEO is it? Renovating T University's century-old library is a feat that can be recorded in history. Furthermore, it's free of charge. I'm really curious who's so generous. Although they're generous, it's not that simple to say that they're doing it for free. T University is definitely one of the top universities in the country. Due to the huge amount of work required, the century-old library has never been renovated. Now that it's being renovated, it will definitely be widely publicized in the country. Regardless of which company the other party is from, in the future, T University and the various universities in the country, including the education industry, will definitely be implicated. The benefits this will bring are all unimaginable. That's right. How can we easily guess the thoughts of those who stand at the top? Today, such soft discussions could be heard everywhere in T University, especially among the business and corporate management students. The discussions were even more heated. In the afternoon, Jinwan was in a rush to read through Professor Lin's test questions and did not eat anything. In the afternoon during the break she went to the cafeteria to buy some food. Along the way she overheard the group's discussion. When she heard that the investor was from High City, she subconsciously glanced out of the cafeteria's window toward T University. She couldn't see the cars parked outside from this distance, so she just glanced at them and walked out with the food she had just bought. Haicheng was indeed the most prosperous city in the country, and it was also a gathering place for talented people. There were many famous and wealthy groups there, and T-City was also an educational institution on par with Peking University and Tsinghua University in the country. It was not impossible for a big shot from an investment group to suddenly have an interest in the education industry. In the evening the day's classes ended. Bai Wei said that she had a friend she had worked with in the past to meet and invited the two of them out to relax. The three of them brought their books back to the dormitory and changed their clothes. Just as they were about to leave, Ling Feifei suddenly ran in. After entering the room, she began to search for clothes and hurriedly searched for various skincare products and cosmetics. It was as though she was in a hurry to go on a date or meet someone important. "Why are you all looking at me?" As Ling Feifei swiftly powdered her face, she glanced at them from the corner of her eyes. "You've also returned to change?" Did she also want to have a chance encounter with President Mo? "Usually all of you don't look like much, but when it comes to it all of you are even faster than me." When Jin Wan and Feng Ling heard the words President Mo, their expressions changed slightly. However, Bai Wei looked at Ling Feifei as though she was crazy. "What President Mo? What chance encounter? It's cold tonight. We just came back to change our jackets before heading out." Ling Feifei clearly did not believe Bai Wei's words. "Who are you trying to fool? Based on your abilities, you should have already heard that the library's investor is High City's Mo Corporation. The president of Mo Corporation is personally visiting our T University. Many of the girls who boast about their beauty have returned after class to change and put on makeup, hoping to catch a glimpse of President Mo before he leaves. That's the Mo Corporation we're talking about. If we can have a romantic encounter with President Mo, if we can sit in his car or even have dinner together, just thinking about it makes me excited." Bai Wei was stunned. Of course she had heard of the Mo Corporation. Her company had applied to work with the Mo Corporation several times, but all of them had been rejected. This company was an unreachable planet to many corporations in the country. Although the Mo Corporation had many partners in the country and had many subsidiary companies, the Mo Corporation's main focus was not on T-City. Furthermore, they did not have much contact with the education industry. Why would they suddenly invest so much money to rebuild T University's library? Although this would bring about many profitable paths for the education industry, with the Mo Corporation's solid strength and the Mo family's foundation, the education industry in the country could not compare to the Mo Corporation's original investment prospects. Why would they suddenly involve themselves in this area? Bai Wei was still in a daze when she suddenly heard a ping sound from the dormitory door. She turned to see that for some reason Jin Wan had suddenly walked out with quick steps. Jin Wan? Bai Wei thought that something had happened and rushed to open the door to look outside. She saw that Jin Wan was walking quickly without turning back, as though she had something urgent to attend to. Feng Ling's expression was calm and indifferent as she walked out. She calmly said, "I'll go take a look." Jin Wan walked out of the dormitory and headed straight for the school building. Those few words kept repeating in her mind. COMO COMO COMO. Usually, whenever there were meetings or important matters, they would be held at the top floor of the school building. Jin Wan's footsteps were fast. Even Feng Ling took a long time to catch up to her. The school building had over 10 floors. The elevator at the end of the corridor did not allow students to use it without permission. Jin Wan took the stairs step by step and finally reached the top floor. She turned to see that the lights in the principal's conference room were indeed lit. "You're T University students? Who allowed you to come to the school's office? Don't you know that students are forbidden from entering this floor?" T University's dean walked out from the office by the side. When he saw Jin Wan and Feng Ling, he immediately furrowed his brows and reprimanded them in dissatisfaction. However, Jin Wan's gaze was directed toward the principal's conference room. "What are you looking at? Why aren't you going down?" The dean urged with a cold expression. The door to the conference room was tightly shut. Only the light from inside could be seen. "May I ask when the meeting inside will end?" Although the dean's attitude was not good, Jin Wan still tried her best to ask politely. Chapter 223. Coincidentally, at this moment, Professor Lin came out of the conference room. The moment he saw Jin Wan, he was surprised. "Jin Wan? Why are you here?" Jinwan looked back and saw Professor Lin hurriedly coming towards her. Just in time. I was planning to go back to my office to get the materials for the business management courses. The school leaders and investors are going to inspect our department. Help me get them. The materials are all on my desk. Go through them carefully and send them directly to the conference room after you get them. Professor Lin was very confident in Jinwan. After instructing her, he rushed back to the conference room. Jinwan only hesitated for a second before turning to head down the stairs. Feng Ling was a temporary transfer student, and her mind was not focused on business management. She did not know much about the materials Professor Lin needed. Jinwan searched the office alone for about 10 minutes. After arranging all the materials Professor Lin needed, she placed them into a folder and brought them to the top floor of the school building. Seeing that she had really brought them over and that Professor Lin had personally instructed Jinwan to bring the materials in, the dean did not stop her. He stepped forward to open the conference room door. Before Jinwan entered, he warned, "Don't speak carelessly in there. It's rare for the school leaders to gather together as well as the library's investors. Remember, don't speak carelessly." "Jinwan, I understand. Thank you." After entering, the voices of the school leaders could be heard in the conference room. The moment Jinwan entered, she saw the man seated at the head of the conference table. Today the man was not wearing a suit. He wore a simple shirt and black pants. His 1.88-meter tall figure was extremely eye-catching as he sat there quietly. His aura was quiet and reserved, and he appeared distant. In terms of looks, figure, and even the calm and indifferent aura he exuded, even the school leaders and principals present, as well as those who were used to standing on high ground, were silently crushed by him. He was like a silent and disdainful person. That cold and slight smile clearly hid a clear alienation and indifference. Jinwan looked at this man whom she had always been familiar with, but at this moment, he suddenly seemed like a stranger. Her heart was instantly stung by bees. She was too used to Mo Jingshan's doting and giving in to her. This Mo Jingshan, who caused her to feel distant, really did seem a little unfamiliar. "President Mo, this is the scope of our T University's cooperation with various major educational institutions in the country in recent years. This includes the education industry." The school leaders were standing in front of a huge screen and pointing at a PowerPoint presentation, detailing the various indicators of T University. The school leaders, who were used to domineering in front of the students, were now looking at the man sitting at the head of the conference table with sparkling eyes. Not only did T University's century-old library need to be rebuilt, but there were also various areas and channels related to the education industry that they hoped would be seen by local businessmen. Right now, they really wanted to seize the opportunity to cooperate with the MO Corporation in the education industry, so they had to use all their means to attract the attention of investors. The ongoing meeting did not stop because of Jinwan's appearance. The school leader only glanced at Jinwan. When he saw Professor Lin stand up and signal for Jinwan to come over, he understood her intentions. The meeting continued without a pause. "Jinwan, come here." Professor Lin was a special professor at T University. He sat in the middle of the left side of the conference table, about 7 to 8 meters away from the head of the conference table. He beckoned Jinwan over. Jinwan brought the materials in her hands to Professor Lin. When she handed the folder to him, Professor Lin flipped through it and nodded in praise. He then turned back to look at her approvingly. "Not bad. As expected, you're the most diligent in your studies. You brought all of my materials here without missing a single page. If it were someone else, who knows how many pages they would have missed." Jinwan felt that her mission was over. She used her gaze to ask the professor if she should leave now. Professor Lin did not reply. At this moment, the school leader happened to be speaking to him. He turned his head and entered the meeting state, not saying whether Jinwan should leave or not. Jinwan stood behind the professor. She raised her eyes and looked toward the head of the conference table. Ever since she entered, Mo Jingshan had only glanced at her once. It was a very ordinary glance, and he had not shifted his gaze toward her since. When she glanced toward him again, she saw that Mo Jingshan was currently reading a T University file that the school leader had eagerly handed to him. He was calmly flipping through it. His calm and indifferent attitude quickly made Jinwan realize that his attention was not placed on her. This man was really cold, unlike Jinwan. Although she appeared calm on the surface, her heart felt as though it had been scratched by a cat. It was painful, itchy and stinging. Unfortunately, the person she was facing was a man who was much more skilled than her. As though sensing her gaze, Mo Jingshan only took a few glances before placing the file down. His indifferent gaze finally landed on her. The moment their eyes met, Jean Wan's footsteps, which were about to leave the conference room, paused. She was not very clear about MO Corporation's plans for this year. Perhaps Mo Jingshan's appearance at T University and his involvement in the education industry was part of their company's original plan. He had not bothered with her for a month. It couldn't be that his sudden appearance here was because of her. Back then she had indeed said something she should not have. Her distrust had crossed his bottom line. But it had been an entire month. What exactly had he been doing this entire month? After not seeing her for a month, this man's posture was really at ease. Professor Lin's student came in to deliver the documents? If you're done, then leave. Seeing that Jean Wan was still standing there, and that CEO Mo's attention seemed to be attracted by her, the principal suddenly spoke up, urging her to leave quickly. At this moment, Professor Lin also turned back to nod his thanks at Jean Wan, indicating with his eyes that she could leave first. Jean Wan silently nodded. From start to finish, she did not say a single word. She turned and walked out. Behind her, a school leader's voice came. That's right, COMO. You previously mentioned that the reason you invested in T University's century-old library was because there is someone very important to you here. Regardless of whether it is to you or to that person, this is truly a matter of great virtue. I wonder who exactly is it that you value so highly, COMO? The author's words. Chapter 224. The moment Jean Wan arrived at the conference room, her expression froze. That day she should not have been so conflicted over the matter. She should not have doubted and distrusted him. At that time she really wanted to ask if she had left any traces on this blank piece of paper. Right now, could this be considered a form of indirect response? Was she very important? At the same time, Jean Wan felt a familiar gaze from behind her. She stood in the same spot. She knew that this was the principal's conference room and that there were many school leaders present. She calmed herself down and quickly walked out. Feng Ling had been waiting for her outside. When she saw Jean Wan come out, she immediately approached her. She used her gaze to ask if the person inside was Mr. Mo. Jean Wan only nodded her head and went downstairs. The sky had already darkened. T-City's lanterns had just been lit, and the streetlights on T University's campus were somewhat far away. Jean Wan said that she wanted to be alone for a while. Feng Ling found a spot far away where she would not disturb her. She watched as Jean Wan paced back and forth on the field behind the campus. It was unknown what she was thinking about. About an hour later, the sky was getting darker and darker. Only the top floor of the teaching building was lit. Jean Wan suddenly noticed that the lights in the conference room on the top floor had been turned off. She abruptly walked in through the back door. She saw that several school leaders had just come down and that Professor Lin was behind her. She approached to ask, "Professor, has the meeting ended? It's already past 8. You haven't returned to the dormitory yet?" Professor Lin looked at her in shock. "The wind is very strong tonight. Go back and rest early. Don't catch a cold. Has everyone gone downstairs?" Jean Wan did not see Mo Jingshan's figure. "The investor has left. The school leaders and I extended the meeting by several minutes. Right now the conference room is empty." "What were you looking for?" Professor Lin sized her up. "Your father and I are old acquaintances, but I've been too busy these past few years. I don't know much about your G family's matters. COMO is also from High City. Could it be that you guys? He has already left?" Jean Wan furrowed her brows. She did not deny Professor Lin's guess. Her words could be considered as a silent admission. Professor Lin immediately glanced at her again. He recalled that Mo Jingshan had specifically asked to look at T University's business management major. It seemed like it was not a coincidence, so it was because of Jean Wan. Professor Lin smiled. "He just left not long ago. If you want to chase after him now, he probably just left the school gate. There's a traffic jam outside the school gate now, so his car shouldn't have left yet." After saying that, Professor Lin left without going overboard. He had no right to ask about the matters of young people, but because of Jean Wan's existence, T University was able to attract such a large investor. This was truly a great contribution from Jean Wan to T University and the library. Jean Wan's reaction was to hesitate for 2 or 3 seconds before she suddenly turned and walked out. She ran all the way to the school gates and saw the cars parked outside. However, she did not know which one was Mo Jingshan's. He didn't drive his ghost to T-City. There was a subsidiary company of the MO Corporation in T-City. He didn't know which company car or his spare car was. He had seen him drive a black off-road vehicle before, but that black off-road vehicle wasn't here. Jean Wan looked at the parking lot outside the school and finally could not help picking up her cell phone to call Mo Jingshan. The call went through, but after a long time no one picked up. In the end, the call was automatically hung up. After a long time, Jinwan did not hear any of the nearby cars ringing. In other words, Mo Jingshan had already left. He left just like that? Jinwan did not give up and called again, but no one picked up. She abruptly gripped her cell phone tightly in her palm, glaring at each car in the parking lot. Very good, Mo Jingshan, your temper is really bad. Jinwan turned and walked back. Feng Ling saw that Jinwan did not seem to be able to find Mr. Mo and walked over from a distance. However, she saw Jinwan's unhappy expression. Gee. Feng Ling saw that there were no other students around and softly said, Mrs. Mo, are you sure the person who came today is Mr. Mo? Where is he? I don't know. Hearing Jinwan's resentful tone, Feng Ling, Bai Wei went out alone tonight and met up with several friends she had interacted with in the workplace. When she returned, she was in a good mood and brought a few cans of beer with her. She knew that Jinwan did not drink, so she originally planned to drink with her. However, for the first time ever, Jinwan took 2 cans of beer from her bed. She sat down and began to drink as though she was competing with the beer. What's wrong with her? Bai Wei was astonished. She turned to look at Feng Ling in confusion. Feng Ling calmly replied, she's probably angered. Who has the ability to anger her to this extent? Also, didn't she say that she can't drink? Should we try to persuade her? Forget it. Let her drink. After drinking, she can have a good sleep in the dormitory. There's no point in stopping her now. Feng Ling glanced at Jinwan. If she really wanted to drink right now, she could understand her feelings. As long as she did not step out of the dormitory tonight, she could drink however she wanted. Bai Wei saw that Jinwan had already finished the 2 cans of beer and turned to look at the other 2 cans in her bag. Aren't you guys going to drink? Jinwan's alcohol tolerance was not very good. She had only drunk 2 cans of beer with a low alcohol content, but her eyes were already slightly red. I bought the alcohol on the way. I only bought 4 cans. If you really want to drink to your heart's content, why don't we go to the bar opposite T University to drink together? Bai Wei saw that Ling Feifei was not around tonight. It was a rare opportunity for the 3 of them to drink and chat together. She directly suggested, that bar's management is not bad. There aren't any messy people. There are only 2 resident singers who sing all sorts of sad love songs. I've been there twice. Their singing is not bad and the environment is good. There's also a wide variety of alcohol. Alright, let's go. Jinwan picked up the 3rd can of beer, opening it as she spoke. Seeing that Jinwan's mood was clearly heightened due to the alcohol, Feng Ling directly said, no, it's already past 9. Let's just drink a few cans in the dormitory. After drinking we'll sleep. However, Jinwan appeared as though she did not hear Feng Ling's words. She had already picked up her coat and put it on. She then sat by the bed to change her shoes. As she tied her shoelaces she said, let's go, let's go. My treat. As she spoke, she glanced at Feng Ling who clearly did not intend to let her go. Let's go together. You'll follow me. What are you afraid of? How could Feng Ling be afraid? If Jinwan really wanted to go out, nothing would happen if she followed Jinwan. Furthermore, in the past month, she did not know what Mr. Mo had done to the Su family in America. They had quietened down and would likely not extend their hands to Jinwan. What Feng Ling was worried about was not Jinwan's safety, but that Jinwan had already drunk alcohol. If Mr. Mo was nearby and did not leave, if Mr. Mo knew that Jinwan had drunk alcohol. Chapter 225. If you're in a bad mood, go out and relax. It's the same even if you don't drink. It's just relaxing. Bai Wei saw that the 2 of them were in a deadlock and decided to smooth things over. You're a woman. No matter what you do, you have to be able to face yourself. Don't take things too hard. It's good to go out and take a walk. It's much better than holding it all in. Jinwan lowered her head and tied her shoelaces. She did not speak, but it was clear that she was indeed holding it in. Feng Ling's relationship with Jinwan was likely getting closer and closer. There were many things that she could empathize with. Even though she remembered CEO Mo's instructions, she truly felt that Jinwan's current mood needed to be released. She had indeed held it in for a month. Today it could be said that her emotions had been triggered. Then go. I'll accompany you. You mustn't drink anymore. You've already drunk 3 cans. Feng Ling sighed slightly. However, the result was that Feng Ling had underestimated the waiters in a place like Leisure Bar. Even though Bai Wei and Jinwan had originally only ordered a fruit plate and a bottle of fruit wine with a low alcohol content, they could not resist the recommendations of these people. In the end, they bought several bottles of wine that were said to be fruit-flavored. One red and one blue. Although they appeared to be fruit-flavored wines, the alcohol content was not particularly low. The result of mixing several types of wine together was easy to imagine. With Jean Wan's alcohol tolerance, in less than an hour she closed her eyes and leaned against the sofa, unmoving. Feng Ling went to support her. Bai Wei sat by the side and sighed. No wonder Jean Wan said that there was someone at home who did not allow her to drink. As expected, her alcohol tolerance is too poor. Alcohol tolerance can be considered one of her weaknesses. Tomorrow when she wakes up, don't laugh at her. Otherwise, based on her recent mood, it's very easy for her heart to shatter into pieces. Feng Ling saw Jean Wan's drunken appearance and half teased and half helplessly helped her up. Bai Wei also had a teasing smile. Is this a relationship problem? I've seen it many times. Women who are usually so impressive in the workplace, once they encounter a relationship problem, they all become like this. I can understand. I definitely won't laugh at her. Feng Ling did not continue speaking with her. She supported Jean Wan and turned to walk out. Jean Wan was really drunk, and it was the first time she was drunk to this extent. She was like a puddle of mud and had to be supported by Feng Ling to steady herself. This bar was located in the basement. They needed to take the elevator to reach it. She had just helped Jean Wan to the elevator when Jean Wan clutched her chest and leaned her head against Feng Ling's shoulder. Her expression was distressed as she said, I've never seen a man with such a temper. Feng Ling, if he doesn't want to care about me anymore, then don't come to T-City. Feng Ling, he still ignores me after coming to T-City. I've already called him, but he won't pick up. He wasn't going to take it. He must have been sitting in one of the cars. Feng Ling, why don't we have a quarrel if you dare? You're giving me the cold shoulder. Do you really think that just because I always feel that I'm in the wrong, I'll soften my temper and cling to you? Did he think he was the Buddha? Did he think that I, Jean Wan, was a monkey in his palm that would never be able to escape and that everything was under his control? Let me tell you, I jumped out in my previous life. Feng Ling, right now, Feng Ling could not be bothered with Jean Wan's incoherent drunken words. She could only silently watch the elevator doors that had been open for half a minute. Her scalp turned numb as she stared at the tall and broad man inside. Jean Wan realized that the elevator doors had opened, but Feng Ling had yet to pull her in. She narrowed her eyes and absent-mindedly saw a man standing inside. She narrowed her eyes and moved closer to take a look. Feng Ling subconsciously rushed to help her in. Jean Wan still staggered and almost fell into the elevator. Feng Ling rushed to hold her back. Mrs. Mo? However, as Jean Wan was being supported, she raised her eyes to look at the man in the elevator. From this distance, the man in front of her was truly handsome to the point of causing one's hair to stand on end. Did she really drink too much? The man who previously refused to talk to her, refused to see her, and refused to pick up her calls seemed to be standing right in front of her. Jean Wan looked at the man in front of her who was as tall as a jade tree. His eyes were cold, his nose was high, and his face was so handsome that it was like the work of the gods. His lower body was still clad in black trousers, which were long and slender. He wore a pure white shirt that was not fully buttoned, revealing his collarbone. He was sexy and exuded an aura of abstinence, causing one to be mesmerized. He just stood there, cold, noble, and distant. As Jean Wan continued to stare at him drunkenly, the man just coldly lifted his eyelids, lightly swept his gaze over the coat Jean Wan was wearing, and finally stopped on her face. His gaze was unreasonably calm, deep and calm. He just stared at her. Jean Wan's coat was put on by Feng Ling when she pulled her up from the sofa. Right now it looked a little messy. Her hair was also loose and tangled around her neck, making her skin look fairer and more delicate. Her cheeks were also much redder from the alcohol. Mr. Mo, Feng Ling supported Jean Wan with some awkwardness. She did not expect that after accompanying Jean Wan to indulge for the first time, she would be caught by Mo Jingshan. It seemed like Mo Jingshan had always been watching Jean Wan's every move. In this month, no matter where Jean Wan was or what she was doing, even if Feng Ling did not report it, he would still know. The man coldly stood in the elevator and did not speak. Mrs. Mo's feelings have been suppressed for a month. Today you finally came, but your attitude dug out all the pain in her heart. About her drinking today, Feng Ling was explaining when Jean Wan suddenly turned to look at Feng Ling. She tilted her head and looked at her, saying unhappily, Feng Ling, why don't you pretend to be a man again? After I jump out of Mo Jingshan's palm, how about marrying you? Anyway, you're so handsome and skilled, why don't we make do with each other? Feng Ling, in an instant Jean Wan was directly thrown into the arms of the man in the elevator by Feng Ling. Her feet were unsteady, and her nose bumped against the man's chest. She immediately frowned in pain and raised her hand to tug at the man's clothes. She grabbed the corner of his clothes with both hands and struggled to stand firm. Then she raised her hand to rub her nose and turned to look at Feng Ling. "Feng Ling, why did you push me?" Feng Ling looked at Jinwan, who was now really drunk and unconscious, and her back tightened because of Mo Jingshan's displeased and cold eyes. She lowered her voice and said, "Mrs. Mo, if you're drunk, quickly close your eyes and sleep. Don't talk." Chapter 226. As Jinwan spoke, she reached behind her muttering, "I can't stand properly right now. Feng Ling, come and support me. It's not good to keep leaning on someone else." Jinwan was so drunk that she could not be stopped. What did she mean by someone else? Right now she was leaning on her husband Mo Jingshan, but right now she was seriously drunk. Her alcohol tolerance was poor to begin with, and she drank so much tonight. Jinwan had most likely never drunk so much in her entire life. Feng Ling? Seeing that Feng Ling did not speak, Jinwan could only prop herself up and turn around to pull her up. The moment she turned around, she could not stand properly. Her legs weakened and she fell to the side, knocking into the man beside her. Almost at the same time, her waist was held down by the man's arm. In an instant, his breath entered Jinwan's nose. It was a clear and clean scent that she was familiar with. She barely managed to hold onto his clothes. She lowered her head to look at his elegant white shirt and well-ironed trousers. She muttered, "Sorry? I drank too much. I couldn't stand properly." As she spoke, she tried to move away from his embrace. However, the man did not let go. His cold eyes stared at her. He watched her drunken little face and pressed her firmly into his embrace. "Sir, I'm very sorry." Jinwan thought that she had hurt him, and that was why he did not let go of her. She quickly apologized. After speaking, she turned to speak to Feng Ling. "Feng Ling, did you not drink tonight? Let's head back to the dormitory. Why isn't Bai Wei with us? Did she fall asleep on the sofa?" Feng Ling thought in her heart, "You should worry about yourself first. Bai Wei isn't drunk. She'll be back in a while," Feng Ling replied to prevent Jinwan from persistently asking. Jinwan nodded. She did not notice when the elevator doors closed. When the elevator doors opened again, she saw that Feng Ling had suddenly turned around to leave. She actually had no intention of accompanying her back. "Hey, where are you going?" Before Jinwan could follow him out, she lost her balance and was pulled back by the man behind her. The moment she bumped into his embrace, Jinwan turned back with a confused expression. She subconsciously smiled at him. "Thank you." As she spoke, she was about to push him away. She had to catch up with Feng Ling recently. Feng Ling had been inseparable from her. Something must have happened for her to suddenly leave alone in the middle of the night. She felt that she had to follow up to take a look. However, after struggling for a long time, she could not escape from his embrace. Jinwan was about to speak when she abruptly heard the man's calm voice ring by her ears. "Stand firm." Jinwan was startled and turned to look at him. However, before she could see clearly, the man brought her out of the elevator. Jinwan was slightly dazed. She wanted to struggle but could not. She could only think that this person was too similar to Mo Jingshan. The night breeze outside the bar was slightly chilly. Jinwan was brought into the car by the man. Her head leaned against the car window weakly. The car door was already locked. She struggled futilely against the window, muttering softly, "I'm telling you, kidnapping is against the law. Hurry and let me out of the car, or else my Feng Ling won't let you off." The man did not speak and had already started the car. Jinwan's eyes were half closed. Her head hurt and she wanted to sleep. However, she was afraid that she would be kidnapped again. She tried her best to maintain a sliver of consciousness to pay attention to the environment outside the car. However, her vision was blurry and she could not see anything clearly. It was only when the car stopped at the condominium near T University that she looked out in astonishment. Right now, even the human traffickers knew so much about her? He even knew where the condominium she rarely stayed in was? "I want to return to the dormitory. I don't want to return here." Jinwan furrowed her brows. Her hand slammed hard against the car window. "I don't want to return here. I don't want to." However, the car door had already opened. The man unbuckled her seatbelt and lowered his eyes to look at her. His voice was low and cold. "If you don't want to return here, where do you want to go? In any case, I'm not going back here." The moment Jinwan thought back to the luggage she saw when she returned that day, her heart was filled with anger. "You want me to bring you back to the dormitory? I'll go back to the dormitory myself. It's not up to you. Get out." Jinwan was about to say no when the man had already gotten out of the car and walked around the car. He opened the door and carried her out. Jinwan raised her hand to push him away, but it was as though the man completely knew what she was going to do next. No matter if she suddenly raised her arm or leg, he was able to accurately avoid them. At the same time, he pressed her down and locked her firmly in his embrace. Jinwan raised her eyes to glare at him. The wind outside the car was slightly chilly. For a second her mind was clear. Suddenly she saw the man's face clearly. Because she was in his embrace, she could smell the man's cool and stern scent. She stopped moving. Was it a dream? Or a hallucination? Didn't he refuse to pick up her calls? But right now, how could Jinwan care about that? The moment she saw the man clearly, she raised her hand to push him away. Go away. The man lowered his head, one hand supporting the back of her head to prevent her from falling back. His other hand threaded through her hair. His voice was soft and gentle, but also like an unhappy warning. Behave yourself. Jinwan pretended not to hear him and pushed him again. In the end, he suddenly carried her horizontally. Her entire body was lifted up by his waist. The moment her feet were in the air, she instinctively cried out. Her two hands clung tightly to his neck. Then she heard the man's low chuckle. However, this chuckle did not sound happy or angry. It was as though he was always aware of her trump card. Without much effort, he easily subdued her, who was as drunk as mud, and even forced her to cling to his body. You'd rather squat by the window like a wronged cat than make a call to say that you miss me. Mrs. Mo, you're really stubborn. The man's deep, calm, and dark eyes watched her. He said coldly with a forced smile, in the afternoon, you stood in the school's conference room and peeked at me. While I was visiting the subsidiary company, you were able to drink yourself into this state. You're really taking advantage of the fact that I can't hit or scold you. Even when I was angry, I couldn't bear to leave you hanging. You've got me, haven't you? Jinwan's hands were wrapped around his neck. Subconsciously, she was afraid of falling. Hearing his words, she immediately glared at him. She did not care if he was hallucinating or real. She said angrily, who says I'm wronged? I eat well and sleep well in T University. I don't feel wronged at all. The night was cold and windy. Mo Jingshan did not say anything more to the stubborn, drunken little woman in his arms. He directly carried her into the condo. Chapter 227. Was this the real Mo Jingshan or something else? This dream was a little too realistic. She stood up out of habit, swaying as she stood by the sofa. She raised her head to look at the man who was a head taller than her. Was it a dream? As she spoke, she reached out to pinch the man's face. Mo Jingshan did not dodge. However, just as her hand was about to touch his face, he caught it with one hand and pulled it down. He held it in his hand and used his strength to support her, preventing her from falling back. And it's a dream. The man's voice was low and cold. She could not hear his emotions. Jinwan stood in front of him, widening her drunken eyes as she tried her best to look at him. After staring for a long time, she suddenly smiled. Forget it. Who cared if it was a dream or an illusion? In any case, it wasn't the real Mo Jingshan. She could scold him however she wanted. It was just an illusion. He definitely wouldn't mind. Mo Jingshan. Jinwan's temper immediately flared up. She planned to show off her might to the illusion in front of her and vent out the anger she had accumulated over the past month. She suddenly pointed at his nose, raising her drunken little face and misty eyes to glare at him. You tortoise bastard. The man's handsome brows rose slightly. You know how to scold people? What do you mean I know how to scold people? In the past, when this old lady quarreled with others and scolded them, you didn't see it. Why do all the rich young ladies in Haicheng hate me so much? Isn't it because back then they all came to provoke me and ended up being scolded until their eyes turned red? It's not like you don't know what kind of personality I had in the past. Jinwan abruptly stood on her tiptoes, raising her hand to tug on his collar. She pursed her lips and began her long journey of venting her frustrations. For you, I nearly pulled out all the thorns on my body. For our marriage, I worked hard to do everything. I've never doubted you. The night before, I was frightened in the underground bar. My panic turned to despair. It was all because of that person I didn't know. The night after, I found out that it was all because of your ex-fiancé. Was I supposed to smile and say it's fine that I didn't mind? Do you think I have no conscience? Let me tell you, if I, Jinwan, did not have a conscience, I would never stick to you like this in this lifetime. So what if it's a divorce? I can go far away. But I've staked everything I have on you, Mo Jingshan. I've given you everything. My everything. My everything. You are indeed unconditionally good to me, but apart from that, you are an abyss that I can't even touch. I don't even know how far away I am from your heart. The wound on Jin Wan's forehead had long healed. Her forehead, which was covered by her bangs, was smooth and clean. It was impossible to tell what she had experienced in the underground bar a month ago. The man's hand brushed aside her slightly sweaty bangs. She suddenly turned her head and bit down on his finger. As she bit down, she thought that it was a dream anyway. It didn't hurt and neither did he. She had vented all her anger. She had scolded him and tomorrow she would be a good man again. He didn't struggle free. Instead, he reached out an arm to steady her body and let her bite him. The taste of blood overflowed from her mouth. Jin Wan finally stopped. She suddenly muttered softly as though she was muttering to herself, I should have changed my life from the very beginning. I must have lost my mind. Otherwise, why would I willingly submit to the siege you drew and be blocked by a man like you who is addicted to poppies? I'm wrong because I can't control my heart calmly. I'm wrong because I care too much about you, right? Do you? The back of Jin Wan's head was held. The man's lips pressed down, blocking her lips. Jin Wan was stunned. Just as she was about to step back, the hand on the back of her head firmly restrained her. The force that restrained her was not gentle. Although it could not be said to be rough, it was much stronger than usual. She was really too drunk. After struggling for a while, she felt tired. The pain and numbness on her lips did not allow her to react. How could there be such a clear sensation in a dream? After that, she fell asleep in a daze. She didn't even know how she fell asleep. Jin Wan did not sleep well. In less than half an hour, she had a bunch of messy nightmares. She frowned and suddenly opened her eyes in shock. The glaring light in the room made her close her eyes again. However, just a glance was enough for her to clearly see the man's handsome face. She realized that she seemed to be lying on the sofa. Mo Jingshan was still there in her dream. You're awake? Do you have a headache? The man's voice fell by her ear. Hearing this voice, which was frighteningly real, Jin Wan's eyelashes trembled. She opened her misty eyes again and looked at the man's face in a trance. She reached out to touch his face to see if the illusion would suddenly disappear. When she reached out, the man's palm suddenly held her waist. Jin Wan was brought to sit on his lap. She pressed her head against his shoulder. She tried to sit up, but her head still drooped little by little on his shoulder. Mo Jingshan, she said softly. In the future, let's not quarrel, all right? Jin Wan buried her face in his neck. Her voice was low and soft. The man's hand paused on the top of her head. After a moment, he looked at her mildly. Are you sober or still drunk? Can you recognize if I'm an illusion or if I'm your husband? Jin Wan buried her face deeper into his neck. I don't know. Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes and looked at her unkindly. He raised his hand to encircle the little woman who had vented her anger with the help of the alcohol. He said indifferently, then let's talk when you're sober. I don't talk to drunkards. Jin Wan, she abruptly tried to leave his lap, but the man held her down and did not let her move. You're so drunk, yet you still have the strength to struggle. It seems like the 1 month I gave you wasn't enough time to calm down. Earlier you said you wouldn't quarrel, but now you're keeping a distance with me with a dark face? Let go of me. I want to go down. Reason? You. Jin Wan raised her half-drunk and half-sober eyes. Her slightly disheveled hair stuck to her cheeks. Her earlier resentful expression was now tinged with awkwardness. Her lips moved twice before she spat out a few stiff words. You stared at me. As she spoke, she tried to shift her butt on his lap. Mo Jingshan lowered his head to look at the woman's face in his arms. His eyes were as deep as the ocean in the silent night. His soft kisses landed on her soft hair. We haven't seen each other for more than a month. If you move around again, it won't be as simple as hurting you. That. Chapter 228. Now that he had said this, if she continued to move on his lap, she would be an idiot. Seeing that she had become obedient, Mo Jingshan rubbed her hair as though he was in a good mood. You've already vented your anger. You've also said that you won't fight anymore. Now, does that hedgehog heart of yours that has its thorns removed feel better? Jin Wan did not speak. Her entire body's senses were focused on the area below her. She was clearly not moving, but why was it still becoming more and more uncomfortable? Little heartless, you still know that I'm angry at you for being heartless. Yet, you're using your drunkenness to shout so much at me. Do you think this is a competition of loudness? Does louder mean you're right? The man's slender fingers weaved through her hair and finally landed on her shoulders. His hand gripped the back of her neck, forcing her to raise her head to look at his face. Although his voice was slightly lowered, as though he was coaxing her, his indifferent gaze made her realize that if she was not drunk and not clear-headed enough, he would most likely have pressed her down on the bed to reason with her. However, right now Jinwan could not tell what reason he wanted to reason with her. Her head was dizzy. Aside from the man's face being particularly clear, she really could not differentiate between north, south, east, and west. However, seeing that she was currently so drunk, he did not plan on bickering with her anymore. If he got drunk, he would be able to avoid facing the storm of all kinds of persuasive words and instigation. It seemed like drinking wasn't a bad thing. When Jinwan woke up, the sky outside the window was already bright. Hangovers were truly too torturous. Yet, there were so many people who liked to stay drunk all night. Every time she woke up drunk, her head would hurt like hell. She sat up and lifted the blankets to discover that she was sleeping on the bed in the condo's bedroom. Of the 2 pillows on the bed, only her side had traces of being slept on, and only her side of the blankets had been lifted. Last night, Jinwan's memories were slightly blurry. She could only vaguely remember some vague impressions. She raised her hand to rub her head and then grabbed her hair. She tried hard to recall but could not figure out if it was a hallucination or reality. She got off the bed and opened the closet to change. She then walked out of the bedroom to look at the empty living room. Looking at the sky outside the window, it should be at least 7 o'clock. If it was just a hallucination, how on earth did she return to the apartment last night? Feng Ling knew that she didn't want to come back to live, so she couldn't take the initiative to send her here. However, if it wasn't an illusion, she would still be the only one in the apartment. The silence made her wonder if she had accidentally entered an isolated world. There was no sound at all. Jinwan was slightly hungry. She went to the kitchen to open the refrigerator and saw that it was still filled with the food that the auntie had sent over 2 days ago. She was not interested in the fruits and food inside. She took out a bottle of yogurt, closed the refrigerator door, opened the lid and walked out expressionlessly. When he walked back to the sofa in the living room, he suddenly stopped and saw a glass cup on the coffee table. He walked over and picked up the cup. There was still half a cup of water in it. He brought it to his nose and sniffed it. It was the smell of hangover tea. She turned to look at the shirt on the sofa. It was the white shirt that the man had changed out of before he left. It looked very clean, but when she picked it up and took a careful sniff, she could still smell the scent of alcohol on it, as well as the refreshing morning scent that only Emo Jingshan had. It was Emo Jingshan's shirt. It was also the half cup of hangover tea that Emo Jingshan had fed her before she went to bed. When she turned back, she saw that there was an extra pair of indoor slippers by the door. They were gray. The auntie had previously tidied them up, but Emo Jingshan had skillfully taken them out and put them on. Another pair of pink indoor slippers was currently being worn by her feet. Some of her drunken memories resurfaced bit by bit. Jinwan abruptly turned around and walked around the apartment. Although the apartment was as quiet and empty as ever, and it was indeed too big for her to live alone, she saw that there was an extra set of men's razors and a mint-flavored bottle of aftershave in the bathroom. After walking around, Jinwan returned and sat on the sofa. She leaned back and rested her head on the back of the sofa, lost in thought. So what happened last night was real. What did she say to Emo Jingshan last night? She even seemed to have tugged on his collar and angrily scolded him. What exactly did she scold? He had left traces of himself in this apartment. Did this mean that he was really not going to hold it against her anymore? But he was not around this early in the morning. It couldn't be that she had scolded him too much last night and angered him away, right? Jinwan pressed her forehead, her eyes staring at the half cup of hangover tea on the coffee table. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly picked up her phone to take a look. There was no call or message. By the time Jinwan left the apartment, it was already past 8 o'clock. Professor Lin's daily class started at 8 o'clock. It was already late and she did not have the time to buy breakfast. She headed straight for T University. When she rushed to the classroom, Professor Lin was in the middle of teaching. He only glanced at her and did not ask anything, indicating for her to quickly sit down. Usually, Professor Lin was very strict with these hedonistic young masters. No one was allowed to be late. If they were late more than 3 times, they could forget about staying here. However, today he did not say anything and actually allowed Jinwan to sit down. "You were so drunk last night. I thought you would sleep the entire day," Bai Wei said softly by the side when Jinwan sat down. If she did not mention this, Jinwan would have forgotten that she went out to drink with Bai Wei last night. Afterward, she was so drunk that she almost fainted. It seemed like it was Feng Ling who came to support her. What happened after that? It couldn't be that she was caught by Mo Jingshan in the act while she was still in that bar, could it? I drank the hangover tea last night and sobered up a little. My biological clock is very punctual. I wake up when it's time. Jinwan did not explain further and calmly replied. Didn't Feng Ling leave with you last night? The two of you didn't return to the dormitory yesterday. Now that you're here, where's Feng Ling? Jinwan glanced at the seat where Feng Ling usually sat. As expected, it was empty. Could it be that Feng Ling thought that she would be with Mo Jingshan for the past 2 days and did not continue following her? I don't know. I'll give her a call in a while to ask. Jinwan shifted her gaze away from the seat. Her heart was slightly hesitant. However, in her impression, Feng Ling always followed through with her actions. She was also very reliable. Even if she thought that she would be at Mo Jingshan's place and did not come to class, she would at least give Jinwan a call or send her a message. Chapter 229. In the condo. Mo Jingshan looked at the shirt Jinwan had folded for him, the glass cup she had washed, and the shaver she had placed in the bathroom cabinet. The corners of his lips turned up slightly. Last night, Jinwan was still drunk, acting as though she had been holding it in for a month. Today, she obediently tidied up the traces he had left behind. This little woman was really becoming more and more duplicitous. Mo Jingshan tugged open the top few buttons of his shirt, glanced at the sky outside the window and chuckled softly. At this moment, his phone received a message. He glanced at it. Nanhing, in T-City? Mo Jingshan replied with one word, N. Nanhing, in that condo or somewhere else? Mo Jingshan casually replied, condo. In less than half an hour, Nanheng drove over, directly knocking on the door and entering. Mo Jingshan looked at his travel-worn appearance. It was clear that he had driven across the province overnight. His entire person exuded a cold and dispirited aura. The moment he entered, he went inside to find water to drink. Why did you come in such a hurry? What's the matter? Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at her. After drinking a glass of water, Nanheng put down the glass in his hand, speaking, back when Feng Ling completed a mission for 11 Base in America, she once intercepted several smuggled military vehicles belonging to the New York Mafia. Those people from the Mafia have been tracking her whereabouts for the past 2 years. My men found out that they have been making some movements in the country recently, and in the past 2 days they have been moving toward T-City. I'm afraid Feng Ling's whereabouts have already been tracked. Mo Jingshan coldly raised his eyelids, watching him. It's all old grudges formed with 11 Base. It's related to the underground arms trade in New York and Los Angeles. Their target is Feng Ling and it won't affect your woman. Nanheng rushed over overnight. He did not sleep the entire night. His expression was dark as he coughed. But for the next few days it's best if Feng Ling doesn't follow Jinwan. If they find out that Jinwan is close to her, it won't be a good thing. Mo Jingshan's cold brows moved slightly. The New York Mafia's vengeance has always targeted a specific person. With their abilities, they won't be able to cause trouble in the country. They won't dare to implicate more people in the country's territory. Nanheng nodded. Feng Ling's matter is only related to the base mission she completed. It has nothing to do with what you did in the United States a few years ago. Keep an eye on Jinwan. I don't need your help here. I know what I'm doing. Be careful. Mo Jingshan said calmly, when the time is right, let's send those people who frequently set up obstacles in the United States to the next world. These years they have also committed many evil deeds. When the time is right, we should personally send them on their way. After a moment of silence, Nanheng said, Did you return to America a few days ago? Mo Jingshan was expressionless. He only listened and did not respond. The news I got from the front line is that the old man of the Su family is very angry with you. What about it? Did the thing that happened to Jinwan a month ago really touch your bottom line? Nanheng's cold and seductive eyes contained a trace of mockery. I don't believe it if you say that Elder Su didn't have any agreement with your father back then. In the end, he thought that he had played a big game, but he didn't know that the manipulator behind the scenes had long been replaced by you. Back then, not only did you break off the engagement with his precious granddaughter, but you also restricted all aspects of the Su family. In the past 2 years he was also very dumbfounded. Even if the Su family's influence is widespread in the United States, they clearly do not intend to openly clash with you. I'm curious, what exactly did you do in America last month? That night, Elder Su was sent to the emergency room in a fit of anger. Thankfully, his life is very tough, and he returned after staying in the hospital for 4 days. But recently, the Su family seems to be closing the country to guard against death. Are you really going to kill his precious granddaughter to avenge Jinwan? Mo Jingshan's smile was calm, as though the manipulator behind the scenes like an executioner that Nan Heng spoke of was not him. His tone was calm. I didn't do anything. I only let him see the pros and cons of the entire matter. If he plans to play a joke with the fate of the entire Su family, I naturally don't mind playing a joke with him. Nan Heng raised his brows. He turned to look at the slightly empty apartment. It was clear that no one came here often. He chuckled. It's already been so long. Don't tell me that Jinwan is still angry? Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold. You can scram now. Nan Heng glanced at the time. Right now was indeed not a good time to tease his brother. He had driven here through the night. Time was too tight. Mo Jingshan was an expert who did not shed a single drop of blood. From the beginning until now, aside from the fiancé who had only existed for a year due to Mo Xiao's interference, he had not missed a single step. For him, perhaps only Jinwan, who had entered his life from the beginning and gradually rampaged in his life, was the only accident. Downstairs, several security guards on duty stood ramrod straight in front of the apartment. Nan Heng walked over, took out his phone and showed them a photo of a single person. This short-haired, tall and skinny woman often comes and goes here. After last night, have you seen her? When the security guards saw the photo, they immediately recognized her as the person who often accompanied Miss Ji in and out of this apartment. 2 days ago I saw her come back with Miss Ji, but not yesterday. I haven't seen her the entire day. Hearing these words, Nan Heng's gaze turned cold. He took long strides, his expression cold as he walked out. The next day, Jinwan stayed at T University as usual. Yesterday she did not receive any news from Feng Ling, nor did she pick up her calls. If it were not for the fact that Professor Lin was about to conduct a random test on this batch of students, Jinwan would have returned to the apartment last night to take a look. Previously, when Feng Ling did not live with her, Feng Ling had a very suitable residence near the apartment. It was located in a residential area that was not too crowded. After another day of classes, Jinwan called Feng Ling, but she still did not pick up. She decided to leave T University and head to the residential area where Feng Ling had stayed for a few days to take a look. For the past month or so, she had suddenly lost contact with the person who was always by her side. On one hand, Jinwan was not used to it, and on the other hand she was worried that something had happened to Feng Ling. That residential area was not far from her apartment. It was only a bus stop away. Jinwan walked there and did not take a taxi. However, from this intersection to the residential area, she had to go around a row of buildings. In the middle there was a small alley between the buildings. Feng Ling had once brought Jinwan through that alley. Chapter 230. Inside, a man could be heard cursing in fluent American English. Although Jinwan didn't hear them clearly, she heard a word or two. With her English level, she could certainly understand them. She immediately leaned against the entrance of the alley and carefully looked in. She immediately saw Feng Ling standing against the wall. In front of her were 2 foreign men, tall and strong. The 2 men seemed to have surrounded her. One of them was holding a knife about the size of a watermelon, and the other was holding a long black electric baton. The 2 of them completely blocked Feng Ling. Seeing this, Jinwan immediately withdrew her head, leaned against the entrance of the alley, and held her breath so as not to alarm the 2 men inside. When she saw Feng Ling being blocked by the 2 men, although she seemed to be standing steadily against the wall, her clothes were untidy, her short hair was slightly messy, and there were some bloodstains on her face. She didn't know where she was cut or what happened. In short, she must have been injured. Feng Ling didn't seem to have any weapons in her hands. No matter how good she was at fighting, she couldn't gain the upper hand. No matter how she was blocked by the 2 foreign men, Feng Ling probably hadn't contacted her since yesterday. Something big must have happened. The 2 men continued to curse inside. After a few words, suddenly there was the sound of fighting. Jinwan listened for a while. Whether it was a hand-to-hand fight or a weapon, Jinwan's heart was in her throat when she heard the sound inside. She suddenly looked up at a car parked across the alley. She didn't know if it was the accomplice of the 2 foreign men. The background of Feng Ling and the American 11 base was quite complicated. If Jinwan called the police now, it might cause trouble for Feng Ling. She held her cell phone, paused on the call, and suddenly looked at a baseball equipment store on the first floor of the building. Her eyes lit up and she walked over. Feng Ling was confronting the 2 men. The battle had not stopped. Since yesterday she had been avoiding the 2 men from the American Mafia, but in the end she was still trapped here. Both of her arms were injured in the fight just now. Although it was not serious, there was still blood dripping down her arms. When one of the men scolded her again, her eyes sharpened, and with a roundhouse kick, she kicked the man with the knife to the ground. Before he stood up, he was about to fight the other man with the stun baton, but the stun baton in his hand was a very strong weapon. If she was electrocuted, half of her body would be numb for 2 days. In the confrontation, the man who had just been kicked down raised a knife and slashed at her head. Feng Ling nimbly raised her hand and grabbed his wrist. With a sharp twist, she heard the sound of his wrist dislocating. The foreign man, who was much taller than her, immediately cried out in pain. Feng Ling expressionlessly raised her foot and kicked him. However, at this moment, the other man directly stabbed her waist with the electric baton, and half of Feng Ling's body was instantly numb. Although she suddenly turned around to avoid it and was about to fight back, her movements were still a little slower because of the electric shock. The man took the opportunity to kick her in the stomach. Feng Ling bent over to avoid it, but the man suddenly pulled up the slightly longer short hair on her head. F***ck. All kinds of curses rang in her ears, and Feng Ling's scalp ached from the pulling. No matter how much strength she had used up a lot of her strength. She was trying to find a way to retreat from this man's hand when she suddenly noticed a figure appearing at the entrance of the alley from the corner of her eye. Feng Ling suddenly smiled at the two foreign men. The corner of her mouth was stained with blood. In the dim alley, her smile was a little cold and ruthless. When Feng Ling successfully attracted all the attention and suspicion of the two men, suddenly, with 2 bangs, the 2 men were hit on the back of their heads. Before they had time to turn their heads to look, they were hit by the baseball bat and fell to the ground. Dizzy and unable to stand firm, Feng Ling took the opportunity to stand up, subdued the 2 of them and pressed them to the ground. Thank you. When pressing the 2 men down, Feng Ling ignored the blood on her body and turned her head to look at Jin Wan, who was holding a baseball bat in her hand. Jin Wan held the baseball bat tightly and quickly stepped forward, looking at the blood on Feng Ling's face and body with concern. She saw that Feng Ling had only been hit on the cheek. The other party had hit her so hard that her cheek was swollen and the corner of her mouth was stained with blood. She reached out to take Feng Ling's arm. How are you? Are your injuries serious? I'm fine. It's just a minor injury. Feng Ling didn't push Jin Wan's hand away but used her other hand to hit the back of the 2 men's necks. After being hit hard by the baseball bat and hit on the most vulnerable part of the neck, the 2 foreign men fainted and lay on the ground motionless. With Jin Wan's support, Feng Ling stood up. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't seem to be seriously injured, Jin Wan's tense heart finally relaxed a little. What's wrong with these 2 people? Do you have enemies in the United States? Enemies? Feng Ling glanced at the 2 men on the ground. Sort of. When I was still in 11 base, I did a lot of missions and made a lot of enemies. You're seriously injured. Let's get out of here first. Jin Wan pulled her hand hard again, wanting to take the injured Feng Ling away from this place. However, as soon as she exerted force, although Feng Ling didn't make a sound, she obviously frowned in pain. Jin Wan abruptly let go of her hand, saw the blood on her palm, and then looked at Feng Ling's black shirt, which couldn't see the color of the blood. Is the injury on your arm very serious? Jin Wan threw the baseball bat in her hand out and held her with both hands. Let's go to the hospital to stop the bleeding first. Before Feng Ling could say that she was fine, she had been forcibly taken out of the alley by Jin Wan. However, just as the 2 of them ran out of the alley in the car parked in front of them, an accomplice who was also tall and strong suddenly opened the door and got out of the car. He held the same black electric baton in his hand and rushed toward them with a fierce look, cursing violently. Watch out. At the moment when the man swung the electric baton, Jin Wan and Feng Ling shouted almost at the same time. Jin Wan was about to pull the injured Feng Ling back, but Feng Ling instinctively pulled Jin Wan behind her, but the pain in her arm couldn't be ignored. The pain from the electric shock was still there. She wanted to push the man back, but her movements were still slower than usual for 2 or 3 seconds. In these 2 or 3 seconds, the man seized the opportunity and was about to reach out his other hand to restrain her. Chapter 231. They definitely couldn't go into the alley. Jin Wan pulled her to run to the other side, but the other party didn't intend to waste any time. Instead of chasing after them, he suddenly returned to the car and drove after them. Whether it was to chase after them or to bump into them, they didn't know. Mrs. Mo, you go first. Feng Ling suddenly paused. She did not plan to implicate Jin Wan. Why would I leave? I'm not a brother from your training base, so I don't know what sacrifice is or what morality is. But in my eyes, you're already a good friend. How can I leave? As Jin Wan ran, she tugged hard at Feng Ling, preventing her from waving her hand away. Let's run first. There's an alley ahead. His car can't drive into it. We'll think of a way after we get in. Seeing Jin Wan's insistence, Feng Ling ran a few steps and felt that her numb body really needed at least a day or two to recover from the electric shock. She couldn't run as fast as usual. Just as the two of them were about to run to the other alley Jin Wan mentioned, suddenly, a black jeep galloped from the road in front of them at a fast speed, and the moment it came to a stop in front of them with a screech. Feng Ling and Jin Wan looked up only to see that the back door of the jeep in front of them was open from the inside out. Nan Heng, who was in the driver's seat, didn't explain at all. He just glanced at the blood on Feng Ling's face and said coldly, "Get in the car." Feng Ling's expression froze, and Jin Wan quickly helped her into the car. When Feng Ling sat in the car and saw that Jin Wan hadn't come up, she rushed to pull her. "Mrs. Mo, come." Jin Wan also got in the car and the door closed with a bang. This sound isolated the sound of the engine of the car outside, and the tense atmosphere in the air finally relaxed a little. Before she could ask what was going on, Jin Wan sat by Feng Ling's side and tugged at her sleeve. "You're bleeding a lot. Do you want to go to the hospital to stop the bleeding or go somewhere else?" "She can't go to the hospital." Without waiting for Feng Ling to speak, Nan Heng, who was driving, said coldly, "Take her to my place. I have hemostatic medicine and gauze. Jin Wan, help her bandage." "Do you have a place to stay in T-City?" Jin Wan turned to look at Nan Heng. "Is it far?" "My apartment is close to here. Just ask her to go to my place. Forget about you. You can't go with me now lest you get into trouble." Nan Heng coldly spat out these words and glanced at Jin Wan through the rearview mirror. "Why were you there just now? If something like this happens again, remember to run first, okay? Otherwise, if something happens to you, I'm afraid your man will chase me to the Pacific Ocean. I won't be able to live in peace for the rest of my life." Jin Wan didn't explain to him but continued to look at Feng Ling with concern. Seeing that Feng Ling's expression didn't change, she didn't seem to be surprised by the fact that they were chased earlier. She just didn't say anything. Jin Wan gently stroked her body. "Are you hurt anywhere else? Don't just stay silent. Tell me where it hurts. If it's too serious, just going home to bandage it won't do. You still have to go to the hospital for an injection." Feng Ling shook her head at Jin Wan, indicating that she was fine and there was no need to worry. Jin Wan suddenly noticed that there were several cars driving in the opposite direction of them. The cars immediately surrounded the car driven by the foreign man. Right now, she had no time to pay attention to the situation outside the car. Jin Wan took out a wet towel from her bag to wipe the blood off Feng Ling's face. Seeing that Feng Ling's face was very pale, she immediately frowned. "Someone actually dares to commit murder in broad daylight in our country. Is there any harm in this? Can we call the police?" "The domestic police can't handle this matter," Feng Ling said simply and raised her eyes to look at the man driving in front. Nan Heng's driving skills were not inferior to Mo Jingxin's. It was clear that he was used to driving this type of jeep. Under his control, the large body of the jeep drove out of the area at a fast speed and successfully took the two of them away before the police arrived. Nan Heng really did have a place to stay in T-City. It was a room on the top floor of a hotel that he had reserved for himself. No one was allowed to enter the entire floor. After entering the room, Jin Wan helped Feng Ling to sit on the sofa and urged Nan Heng to get the first aid kit. She then pressed Feng Ling's shoulder saying, "Feng Ling, I'll help you take off your clothes. Otherwise, when the blood coagulates, it will be very painful to take them off." Seeing that Jin Wan seemed to be really worried about her, Feng Ling's originally calm and flat expression wavered slightly. Since she was a child, Feng Ling had never experienced pure friendship with someone of the same gender. In the past, she had always lived like a man in the base. No matter what kind of injury she suffered, she would hide in a place where no one could see and bandage her own wounds. "You can't lift your hand now, can you? I'll help you take it off. Don't move." Jin Wan spoke and went to help her take off her clothes. Feng Ling did not refuse. When her top was taken off, thankfully, there was still a conservative black sportswear underneath. Jin Wan's attention was completely attracted by the knife wounds on Feng Ling's shoulder and arm. With a pained expression, she turned to the bathroom to wash a towel and help her wipe the blood around the wounds. Nan Heng came out with the first aid kit and saw such a scene. His gaze paused on Feng Ling, who was only wearing sports underwear. Before he could speak, Jin Wan had already rushed over and snatched the first aid kit from his hand. She then turned back to disinfect and stop the bleeding for Feng Ling. The room was very quiet. With Jin Wan bandaging Feng Ling's wounds, it was not convenient for Nan Heng to stand by the side and watch. He coughed and went out. Half an hour later, The wounds on Feng Ling's body were almost all treated. Jin Wan had just picked up the gauze to bandage her wounds. She then went into the room, opened the cabinet, and took out a loose black t-shirt that should have been worn by Nan Heng. She helped Feng Ling put it on. Not long after, Nan Heng entered the room. Seeing that Jin Wan had already crouched down to treat the wounds on Feng Ling's legs, he raised his brows and chuckled softly. "You're quite thoughtful in treating the wounds." As expected, Miss Ji is much more useful than before. Jin Wan silently rolled her eyes at the disinfectant in her hand. She thought that Nan Heng was resentful towards her because he wanted to personally bandage Feng Ling's wounds but was unable to do so. She could not be bothered with him. At this moment the doorbell suddenly rang. Jin Wan was startled and immediately raised her head to look in the direction of the door. She asked in surprise, "Who is it? Is there anyone else here who knows? Could it be those people who chased after Feng Ling earlier?" Nan Heng glanced at her. "Don't think too much. I just went out to talk to Mo Jingshan on the phone. He happens to be nearby. Who do you think will come now?" Hearing this, Jin Wan abruptly turned to stare at the door behind Nan Heng. Chapter 232. Since Mo Jingshan was outside, wasn't it the same no matter who opened the door? It was impossible to shut him out. The doorbell rang again. It was a pleasant chime, not very loud, not harsh. But in Jin Wan's ears, this voice was like a tsunami suddenly sweeping across a calm sea, making it impossible for her to ignore it. Nan Heng was clearly teasing her. He did not open the door but stood there looking at Jin Wan with a faint smile. Jin Wan's hand was still holding onto the bottle of medicine. She placed it on the wound on Feng Ling's calf and did not immediately get up. Feng Ling glanced at them and suddenly put down her legs. She said, "Why don't I drive it?" Nan Heng immediately glanced at Feng Ling coldly. "Don't be nosy." Feng Ling's expression faltered. It had been a long time since she heard Nan Heng speak in such a cold and stern tone. She paused and chose to sit on the sofa without moving. At the same time she turned to look at Jin Wan. "Mr. Mo must have come to see you. Go open the door. My leg injury is not serious. I can do it myself." The doorbell did not ring again, but she felt that Mo Jingshan would not leave so soon. She put down the disinfectant in her hand, wiped her hands and got up to go to the door. The moment she opened the door, Jin Wan's hand gripped the doorknob tightly. The man standing outside the door was tall and slender. He was still wearing that low-key clean white shirt, which made his originally calm and reserved temperament appear even gentler and more meaningful. Jin Wan raised her eyes and looked at the man outside the door. Mo Jingshan's eyes fell on her face the moment the door opened. They hadn't seen each other for a whole month, and she hadn't been very clear-headed before. This could be considered a true reunion. After opening the door, Jin Wan only met his gaze. Before she could see the emotions in the man's eyes, she let go of the door handle, turned to walk in and said, "I'll deal with the wound on Feng Ling's leg first." She didn't know if these words were meant for Mo Jingshan, Nan Heng or Feng Ling. In any case, Jin Wan didn't look at the man outside the door and went to Feng Ling's side. Feng Ling, who had suddenly become Jin Wan's biggest excuse, was thinking. Indeed, she was like a little woman who had just learned how to fall in love. Thinking of Jin Wan's usual calm and composed demeanor, and comparing it with her current state, he somehow found it a little cute. Nan Heng immediately smiled at Mo Jingshan, who had been thrown out the door with a sympathetic gaze. Mo Jingshan, on the other hand, calmly entered, ignoring Nan Heng's mocking expression. Seeing the blood-stained towel by the sofa and the wound on Feng Ling's leg, he could guess what kind of danger they had just experienced. "What's going on? You were intercepted so quickly?" Mo Jingshan looked at Feng Ling. "Why is Jin Wan with you? Why would Jin Wan be with her?" Of course he was only referring to today. Feng Ling didn't have time to ask why Jin Wan had gone there. She lowered her eyes to look at Jin Wan, who was squatting by the sofa to disinfect her wound. "I haven't heard from you since yesterday. This has never happened before, so I suspected that something might have happened to you. I planned to go to the neighborhood you lived in for 2 days to take a look, but I ran into this scene." Jin Wan treated the wound on her leg seriously and did not raise her head as she spoke. She didn't expect that Jin Wan would actually worry about her. Clearly she was Jin Wan's bodyguard. Feng Ling felt slightly ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mo. I'll try to avoid this kind of thing in the future. If I accidentally hurt you, it would be my negligence. Today's matter, I'm really... being followed and surrounded by enemies isn't something you can control. Why are you apologizing to me?" Jin Wan still lowered her head, as though using this opportunity to talk to Feng Ling, she could successfully ignore the gaze of the man who was watching her from behind. Feng Ling suddenly raised her head. Speaking of which, if Mrs. Mo hadn't helped me today, I wouldn't have been able to escape so smoothly. Nanheng raised his brows and glanced at them. Is that so? Then as a bodyguard, aren't you going to lose your job soon? Do you want to return to America with me, to the base? Feng Ling, no. Nanheng. Jinwan raised her eyes to look at Feng Ling. Seeing that she rejected her so straightforwardly, she immediately smiled. That's right, I'm not going back. Feng Ling is fine by my side. Why would I return to the base in America? What's so good about being with a bunch of men and suffering? Besides, even if I don't completely need a bodyguard by my side, I still need a good sister. Don't you think so? Feng Ling? These few days, Feng Ling had been touched by Jinwan's words time and time again. She looked at Jinwan and slightly raised the corners of her lips. Nanheng suddenly narrowed his eyes. He felt that after spending so much time with Jinwan, Feng Ling had actually gained a hint of femininity and gentleness that he had never seen before. Does it hurt? Jinwan saw that there was a red and swollen area around Feng Ling's ankle. She wasn't sure if she had bumped into it somewhere, so she used her hand to touch it. No, Feng Ling answered with a smile. Seeing the two of them acting out their deep sisterly affection, the two men who were completely ignored exchanged a silent glance. After helping Feng Ling with her wounds, Jinwan stood up. She tidied up the medicine box and asked, Nanheng, do you have water here? Earlier, when she pulled Feng Ling along to run, Jinwan didn't know if it was because of her heart or because she was really thirsty. Either way, her mouth was dry. Drinkable water? In the fridge, there's mineral water prepared by the hotel every day. Go look for it yourself. Although this was a hotel room, it was a family-style suite. There was a kitchen, a study, and a kitchen. The fridge would also have drinks delivered by the staff on time. Jinwan put down the things in her hands and turned to enter the kitchen. She opened the fridge door and took out a bottle of water. She was about to twist it open when she realized that the cap was too tight. This was a bottle of mineral water that had not been opened. It was likely that the cap was not handled well when it left the factory. It was much tighter than other mineral water. She used a bit of force but was still unable to twist it open. She was about to place this bottle back into the fridge and change to another one. She had just opened the fridge door when the bottle in her hand was suddenly taken away. She only saw an arm reach out from behind her, and the water was already in that person's hand. Without needing to turn back, she only needed to see the arm in the white shirt to know that the man standing behind her was Mo Jingshan. Jinwan was silent for a moment in front of the fridge door. She turned to look at the man who had easily opened the bottle cap for her. The already opened bottle of mineral water was handed to her. Mo Jingshan's voice was the same as always. Drink it. Jinwan's hand paused for a moment before she raised it. When she received the water, her mind was still in a daze. For some reason she said, "Thank you." Chapter 233. Thank you? Mo Jingshan's voice was low and indifferent. He glanced at her. Who are you talking to? To you, of course. Jinwan held the water bottle without speaking. She then took a sip and calmly answered honestly. He did not speak further. Just as Jinwan was about to walk past him to leave the kitchen with the bottle, he abruptly held her in his arms. He pushed the woman who was holding the bottle carefully forward, forcing her against the wall opposite the refrigerator. Seeing that the man was angered by her words, Jinwan finally believed that he was not as indifferent as he appeared. He could control her emotions and her emotions. It turned out that this man was not always so calm. It turned out that he was also immortal. He also had his emotions. She raised her eyes to look at him. What are you doing? Nanheng and Feng Ling are both outside. Even if you gave them 100 guts, they wouldn't dare to come in. Mo Jingshan's voice was as low and cold as ever. Repeat what you just said. Who are you saying thank you to? Jinwan, who am I to you? Jinwan's expression remained the same. Her voice was also calm. You used to be my husband. Then we suddenly didn't contact each other for an entire month. Who would know who you are to me? Mo Jingshan raised his brows. Aside from throwing a tantrum, your attitude before and after drinking is basically the same. So, you don't intend to give any explanation for drinking behind my back? Why should I explain? Jinwan calmly looked at him. What I should guard against is not the problem of whether I drink or not, but my heart, right? She could not recall all the words she said that night after getting drunk, but she still had some impression of them. Even though she knew that it was not easy for him to appear, even though she knew how difficult this month had been, she still could not put down her pride. Even though some of the mistakes had come from her. but right now she could not bring herself to smile. After being treated coldly for a month, it was as though she was placed in an icehouse. Mo Jingshan's eyes gradually revealed a faint smile. He watched as her stiffened expression was like a disobedient kitten. She was clearly soft and waiting for his touch, yet she insisted on acting stiff and forbidding. He lowered his head and moved closer to her lips. "What? You're still so unreasonable now that you're awake?" Jinwan rushed to move back, but the man had already kissed her. However, he only kissed her once on the lips before moving away. As she glared at him, he moved his hands away from her shoulders and placed them against the wall behind her. He lowered his eyes to stare at her. "Why are you still angry? It's been a month and you still haven't figured it out?" The man stood under the kitchen light, his long shadow looming in front of her, blocking out most of the light. "How would I dare to be angry? Just because you threw a tantrum, you were given the cold shoulder for a month. If I were angry because you didn't answer my call, I'm afraid you would directly draw a line with me, wouldn't you?" Jinwan coldly glanced at him. "Don't stand here and block me. Let me out." With that, she tried to push him away. In the end, her strength was always futile against this man. She pushed him a few times, but he didn't move an inch. Instead, the way he looked at her became deeper and deeper. She turned her eyes away, refusing to look at him. She frowned and said, "Feng Ling is still injured. I don't want to talk to you about not answering my call? Compared to you stubbornly wanting to save face and purposely hanging up after one ring, which one is worse?" Mo Jingshan stared at her face, speaking softly. "That day when I arrived in High City, I contacted the subsidiary company in advance. There was an emergency meeting, and after I left T University, the company's car came to pick me up. I put my phone on silent mode and placed it by the side. When I looked through the company's documents and picked up my phone, I saw that you had 2 missed calls." Jinwan did not speak, but her gaze remained unkind. "Speaking of which, it's interesting." The man placed his hand against her neck. "In this entire month, the first time you called, you hung up after one ring. The second time you called, it was already a month later. I didn't pick up and you went to drink to drown your sorrows. Thinking about it, you're indeed living a carefree life. You can be so unrestrained when you're happy or unhappy. Even the reason you went to drink is so perfect." It was clear that these words were purposely mocking. Although the meaning behind it was not deep, it was an ironic mockery. Yet it was aimed at her vitals. For a moment, Jinwan was speechless. Nanheng and Feng Ling were still outside. She really did not wish to cause any trouble here. Furthermore, the two of them had already stayed in the kitchen for long enough. It was necessary for them to leave. She was about to raise her hand to push him away again, but the man did not let go. "If you still have any grievances, just say it. Don't keep it in your heart. Just say it." His gaze was too deep and too intense, binding her tightly against the wall. She couldn't escape, nor could she avoid it. Jinwan looked at Mo Jingshan, who was so close to her, and absent-mindedly recalled the feeling of not being able to touch him for a month. She gritted her teeth and said, "Didn't I already say earlier? How would I dare to have any grievances? In terms of temper, my temper isn't as big as yours. In terms of ruthlessness, I'm also not as ruthless as you." As she spoke, she leaned against the wall even more. Even though the distance between them was only a few hundredths of a millimeter, she still had to move further away. However, she was still in his arms. Mo Jingshan looked at her and then at her, subconsciously resisting his intimacy. His gaze was indifferent, and he did not give her a chance to move further away. He directly leaned down, using an absolutely oppressive posture to deprive her of her freedom. He leaned closer to her lips and said in a low voice, "If you want to calm down, I'll let you calm down. Is a month a long time? Previously, didn't you say that you wanted to live apart from me for 3 months and have a so-called long-distance relationship?" Jinwan, a month was not a long time. But a month without seeing or receiving any news from him was really a very, very long time. It was so long that she began to doubt her life. Jinwan could not hold it in any longer. Since she had already said it to this point, there was no need to suppress it anymore. She abruptly said, "Even if what I said that day may have touched your bottom line, and you're unhappy that I don't trust you, you just left like this for a month. During this month you just left me hanging. Do you feel at ease?" "I didn't leave you hanging." "Then why didn't you send any news for a month?" "I took the time to resolve a past that shouldn't have existed." "Resolve? Past?" Although he didn't say it directly, Jinwan understood him. A month ago, when she questioned him about that so-called fiancé, he said that he would deal with it. So, it turned out that he went to Chapter 234. So, it turned out that in the past month he had gone to solve those things? How did he solve them? This man always did everything without batting an eyelid. Jinwan had thought that he was simply angry with her and gave her the cold shoulder for a month. It turned out that he was actually so decisive. She suddenly lowered her eyes. For a moment she didn't even know what she was angry about. In the past month had she calmed down? She had indeed calmed down, and she was way too calm. She glanced at Emo Jingshan again. On my birthday you were the one who made the cake. Why didn't you tell me? As she spoke, she puffed up her cheeks unhappily, but this unhappiness didn't come from anger. Instead, she was annoyed that because of what happened in her previous life, she was too subjective and defensive when looking at certain things. Instead, she neglected too much warmth and detail. Perhaps she was only annoyed. You still know that I made those cakes? When I cut them one by one, I didn't see your heart ache, the man said half-jokingly, stroking her hand. You're not angry anymore, En? What was there to be angry about? Jinwan wasn't that unreasonable. She wouldn't give up a good man. Was she really going to give up this piece of meat to someone else? She wasn't a masochist. Jinwan suddenly pulled down one of his hands that was leaning against the wall behind her. She held his palm that was much larger than her own. It was hard to imagine how he had the energy to make so many cakes for her that day. Whether it was the cream or the base cake, the taste was especially sweet and soft. This man could do everything so well. He was really impeccable. She held his hand in her palm and then held his slender fingers, whispering, "Then what do you want as compensation?" Emo Jingshan looked at her and his eyes were full of smiles. He held her hand, lowered his head to kiss it, and then leaned over to kiss her lips. He pressed his lips against hers and said hoarsely in a low voice, "What do you think I need as compensation?" Jinwan's body immediately softened from his kiss. She pursed her lips and said, "How about I make 21 dishes for you tonight? After you're done, you're going to throw them away right in front of me? Am I that childish?" "You mean I'm childish?" It had been a long time since Jinwan cooked, especially after she came to Tea City. Right now, she was trying to think of ways to make up for her mistake by giving him a chance to take revenge and make him feel good. However, since he didn't appreciate her kindness, she couldn't be blamed. Suddenly, a few dong-dong sounds came from the wall outside the kitchen. Nanhing knocked on the wall a few times. "You two don't go too far. You've been in there for so long. Do you need me to take Feng Ling away and leave this room to you?" Jinwan subconsciously tugged on Emo Jingshan's hand, rushing to leave. However, Emo Jingshan did not move. He pulled her back and took the opportunity to hold the little woman who was leaning against the wall to maintain a distance from him. He whispered by her ear, "Giving up the room to us is not a bad choice." "Jinwan," she pressed her hand against his chest. "Feng Ling was just injured, and it's clear that she's being chased by some unknown force. After all, she's someone you hired. You have to be concerned about her safety. How can there be such a cold-blooded boss like you? With Nan hung around, she doesn't need my concern." His words were simple and straightforward. Then he warned and commanded, "In the future, if there's any activity from unknown pursuers or foreigners, you're not allowed to get close. Although Feng Ling's skills aren't bad, her background isn't simple. When the situation is tense, what you need to do is to take care of yourself, understand?" Today, when Jinwan rushed into the alley with a baseball bat, it was probably because Feng Ling was there. She believed that Feng Ling would be able to handle it, so she had the confidence to rush in to help. Of course, she had the awareness to protect herself, but she wasn't too weak. Hiding whenever something happened wasn't her style. Of course, she wouldn't let others worry about her. "I know. When it's cold, you don't show up. When it's good, you're like a housekeeper managing me," Jinwan muttered. Emo Jingshan. When Jinwan walked out of the kitchen, she saw that Feng Ling had put on her black sports coat. If it weren't for the fact that she was only wearing underwear inside and couldn't take it off, she would have taken off Nanhang's black t-shirt as well. She saw Feng Ling sitting on the sofa with the coat on, as though the person who was injured earlier was not her. Aside from the fact that her complexion was paler than usual, there was no difference. Was this the reason she had received training? She couldn't even cry out in pain and had to endure all kinds of feelings as though they had never happened? "You're finally willing to come out. I thought the two of you would stay in my kitchen until the end of time." Nanheng leaned against the wall outside the kitchen door with a cold smile. His eyes glanced at Jinwan's expression, which had softened a lot. Without guessing, he knew that this little woman had probably been coaxed. Emo Jingshan placed his hand on Jinwan's waist, encircling the little woman who was about to head to the sofa in his arms to prevent her from running away. He glanced at Feng Ling and the medicine box by her feet before shifting his gaze to Nan Heng's side. They went in such a big circle. Was their target her or you? Nan Heng's face was indifferent and he smiled lazily. We're all working together in 11 base. Their biggest target is either me or her. What's the difference? Mo Jingshan looked at him and said indifferently, your woman has been injured to this extent. You clearly want to personally uproot the nest of those trash, but now you can lean against here and smile as though nothing has happened. Even Jin Wan isn't as big-hearted as you. Nan Heng, Jin Wan? What did it have to do with her? Mr. Mo, I'm not his woman. Although you're my current boss, please don't put labels on me. Feng Ling spoke up, protesting unhappily. However, Mo Jingshan seemed not to hear her words and only glanced coldly at Nan Heng. Nan Heng was silent for a few seconds and temporarily put away his lazy attitude. These days women are not easy to raise. Whether they're light or heavy, it's wrong to keep them by your side. It's wrong to let them go. Jin Wan didn't understand his words. Sitting on the sofa, Feng Ling's expression turned cold. Chapter 235. Although Jin Wan was held in Mo Jingshan's arms, she still silently shifted closer to him. Although she could not accurately capture the meaning of their conversation, she could still smell the faint smell of gunpowder. She had long known that Nan Heng's background was not simple, and that the people involved in the arms business could not be simple either. However, she did not expect the severity of the situation to be deeper than she had imagined. In this aspect, it did not only involve the arms business, the country, and the underworld. There were many other problems that Jin Wan had not come into contact with. At this moment she was only thinking about how Nan Heng was so complicated. What exactly was his relationship with Mo Jingshan and Qin Siding? She vaguely remembered that Qin Siding had mentioned that he had saved Feng Ling's life in America. What about Mo Jingshan? What kind of role did he play between them? Compared to the coldness in Nan Heng's eyes and Jin Wan's silent confusion, Mo Jingshan appeared especially unperturbed. The road to death is their own choice. It's not a big price to drag you down with them before they die. It was clear that Mo Jingshan was reminding them. Nan Heng had naturally understood this long ago. Nan Heng curved his thin lips coldly. I didn't bring Feng Ling back to the country purely to be your woman's bodyguard. Since I left her in the country, I've naturally hidden an ambush. If they want to come, they can come. I guarantee that if they come, they will die. Mo Jingshan patted Jin Wan's waist from time to time, his expression mild. Using your own woman as bait, only you, Nan Heng, would do such a cold-blooded and heartless thing. Nan Heng, Mr. Mo, I already knew all the missions and procedures at the base. Everything was my own choice, Feng Ling interrupted. This was probably the first time Feng Ling had spoken up for Nan Heng in front of them, but her tone was clearly cold. Letting a woman protect you, is this something a man should do? Mo Jingshan ignored her, as though he was purposely provoking Nan Heng, throwing a ruthless knife at him. Nan Heng. The way you two are echoing each other, I almost suspect that Feng Ling has been brainwashed by your woman. When did she learn to cooperate with you? Jin Wan suddenly spoke up softly. Nan Heng, Feng Ling was clearly speaking up for you earlier. Doesn't your conscience hurt when you said that? Although she did not understand the situation well, seeing Mo Jingshan, who understood the situation, criticize Nan Heng in such a manner and seemed to be enjoying it, Jin Wan could not help but join in. Nan Heng did not speak again. He suddenly narrowed his eyes coldly and looked meaningfully at Feng Ling. Feng Ling did not continue to say anything. She stood there in the sportswear stained with blood. By the time she left Nan Heng's hotel, it was already very late. Even if T University didn't have a curfew, Jin Wan knew that she wouldn't be able to return to the dorm tonight. Mo Jingshan brought her back to T University's condominium. In the car she asked, the solution you mentioned earlier, did you return to America last month? I have to do what I promised you. If I don't go there myself, how can I give you a perfect explanation? The man's voice was calm and low. It was one thing to guess it, but it was another to hear it from his own mouth. Jin Wan's heart immediately beat wildly from the heat. I'm not too calculative. It's just that what happened that time was too much of a shock to me. In that kind of situation, if I could still maintain my rationality and not question or vent at all, I'm afraid I wouldn't be a normal person. Or perhaps I don't care at all. However, I have no intention of forcing you to do anything, nor do I want to make things difficult for you. It's not difficult. You don't have to worry about this matter. I said I'll handle it, so I'll handle it. I definitely won't leave behind any future troubles. Jin Wan glanced at him. Did he mean that the person who wanted to snatch this piece of meat from her mouth was no longer the biggest problem? Although Mo Jingshan might be able to resolve the Gordian knot if he personally took action. But for her, wouldn't it be too unchallenging to be killed before she even saw the enemy? They alighted from the car and returned to the condominium. Mo Jingshan immediately held her hand after alighting. The man's palm coincidentally held onto her hand. She turned to assess him and found that Mo Jingshan seemed to be maintaining his original state at all times. There was never any sudden changes. Regardless of whether it was his personality or his appearance, he was very stable. That night, the reason why I was able to relax enough to drink was because I knew Feng Ling was by my side. That's why I was so at ease. Jin Wan glanced at him again. That day you didn't really bring me away from the place where I was drinking, did you? Did you not want me to see your drunken appearance when Feng Ling helped you out? Or did you not want me to know that you were so drunk that you couldn't even recognize my face? When Mo Jingshan heard her mention the matter of drinking, he initially ignored her. Only when he pulled her into the elevator did he cast her an indifferent glance. Jin Wan, there was no need to ask. It was clear that he had indeed found her in that bar. So at that time she couldn't even recognize his face? No, that's not right. At that time she only thought that she had seen wrongly and thought that it was an illusion. How could she not recognize Mo Jingshan's face? After entering the elevator, Mo Jingshan swiped the elevator card and did not look at her again. Jin Wan knew that she had promised him that she would not drink anymore. In the end, she still purposely used alcohol to drown her sorrows. Mo Jingshan did not want to bicker with her over such things when he had just coaxed her. However, it was clear that he was still unhappy with her drinking. Jin Wan stood by his side and watched their figures through the elevator door mirror. When their gazes met, she directly leaned against his arm. In the future, even if I drink, I'll only drink happy alcohol and celebratory alcohol. I won't use alcohol to drown my sorrows or sulk with you anymore. The man finally raised his eyes and glanced at her through the mirror. You didn't even plan on not touching a single drop of alcohol. Happy alcohol? You sure know how many lines you'll cut off when you drink. Jin Wan pursed her lips. The elevator stopped at the apartment floor and she followed him out of the elevator. Before returning, they sat down at Nan Heng's place and had some food with everyone. Jin Wan was not hungry now. After entering the door, she turned on the light and had just changed her shoes when she saw Mo Jingshan put on the gray indoor slippers. The man who had disappeared for a whole month had returned just like that. The emptiness in her heart was instantly filled. For a moment she couldn't tell what kind of feeling she was feeling, but inexplicably she was relieved. Recently Jin Wan's schedule was too unhealthy and she was used to being sleepy. After all, it was almost 11 o'clock. She took off her coat and went straight into the bathroom, planning to take a shower and go to bed. Because she was too sleepy, she didn't even soak in the bathtub but directly took a shower under the shower head. However, the bathroom door suddenly opened. She raised her sleepy face and didn't react for a moment. She only saw the man in a shirt and trousers step on the water stains on the ground and come over in the white mist. The man's arm circled her waist, and with the other hand he turned off the bathtub and immediately picked her up by the waist. Jin Wan was a little sleepy. I haven't finished my shower yet. What are you doing? Let's shower together later. That. Chapter 236. Jin Wan was carried out of the bathroom by him. She didn't even have a towel, let alone clothes. Naked, she was directly brought out of the bathroom by the man. What time is it now? Although Jin Wan was sleepy, every time he touched her whole body was extremely sensitive. In addition, she wasn't wearing any clothes and the slightly cold indoor air touched her skin, making her particularly sensitive. He was going to carry her back to the bedroom, but because she was naked, Jin Wan squirmed uncomfortably in his arms. He finally couldn't restrain himself. Although he hadn't touched her for more than a month and wouldn't do anything to his lower body every day, the moment this woman pressed against his arms, the self-control Mo Jingshan was most proud of instantly disappeared. The man's sudden kiss was slightly more urgent than Jin Wan had expected. Before they reached the bedroom, he pressed her down on the long table behind the sofa with several books. Although this seemingly gentle man's style in bed was never as gentle as his appearance, Jin Wan still couldn't resist him. Mo Jing, be gentle? He lowered his head to kiss her. He made a vague sound and didn't show any signs of slowing down. She protested softly, let's go back to the bedroom. He kissed her lips and chuckled hoarsely. No, I can't wait. Jin Wan? It's only a few steps from the bedroom. Do you think it's necessary? Including the half a month before your birthday, I've been a vegetarian for almost a month and a half. Do you think it's necessary? The man's hot and husky breath pressed against her ear. He kissed and bit her earlobe, burning the sensitive spot on her ear. Do you think your husband is a saint? Do you think he can watch you close the door and sleep after taking a shower? But it's cold and hard here. Being stared at by the man's ink-like eyes, Jinwan suddenly felt that she was about to burn. She forced herself to appear calm and composed, but in fact, a small flame had already leaped up in her heart, burning brighter and brighter. Just as she finished speaking, the man who had been pressing her against the table easily exerted a little force. Her entire body was suddenly turned around, and in an instant she was leaning against the edge of the table and holding her in his arms. The man pinched her chin and kissed her again. He pried open her teeth and attacked her. He swept across her teeth even more fiercely and domineeringly than usual, bringing her into his mouth and kissing her inch by inch, not letting go of any part of her. It had indeed been a while since they were intimate. Jinwan thought she was very calm in this regard. Although Mo Jingshan teased her until she couldn't control herself, at least the two of them had gone through the stage of inseparable entanglement. These few months of separation shouldn't be a big deal, but this sudden and different kind of stimulation in this kind of place, in this kind of position, Mo Jingshan clearly took into consideration that it had been a while since she last did it and that it would be difficult for her to adapt. Although he was already like an arrow on the bowstring, he still patiently released her. Soft and dense kisses landed on her neck and ears. He sucked on her earlobe, bit on her collarbone and moved downwards. Jinwan was stimulated to the point that the corners of her eyes turned red. She bit down and was forced to shrink back. The living room light landed on her fair, delicate and beautiful skin. She softly and hoarsely said, "Don't itch." The man ignored her. His hand slid down the white skin of her thigh. Jinwan moaned softly and sobbed. Mo Jingshan, what did you call me? Mo Jingshan's hand paused. He darkly glanced at her. Jinwan, hubby, it had been a while since she called him this. She couldn't react in time. In the end, her soft and delicate voice caused the man's gaze to darken. Jinwan saw his extremely dark and thick gaze. When he looked at her, it was clear that he would not give her any leeway or chance to retreat. Tonight he would definitely not let her off so easily. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes, watching the woman he had been holding in his arms the entire time. Because of his teasing, she was sitting weakly on his lap. Her exquisite, fair body was exposed under the light. The veins on his forehead were about to pop. "Do you really like to call me by my full name?" His voice was terrifyingly hoarse. His head moved closer to her ear, softly and unhurriedly saying, "In a while, I'll let you shout to your heart's content. Remember not to cry." The man's brazen threat caused Jinwan to involuntarily shrink into his embrace. She felt that there was really no way for her to sleep tonight. Without waiting for her to speak, his still mischievous fingers directly invaded her. "Even if you cry, I won't let you off." Jinwan whimpered, unconsciously shrinking her body. Her entire body was dyed with a faint rose color. Her hands trembled as she grabbed his arm, using an undetectable amount of strength to push him away. "Wait a minute, should we first decide on a time to end? If I don't sleep for an entire night, I really won't be able to take it. I can't wait." Mo Jingshan did not give her any chance to speak. The movement of his fingers had already brought out all of her senses, which she could no longer control. Jinwan buried her head into his neck, her nails digging into his back. Her lower lip was bitten until there was a white mark. Her entire body was stimulated to the point that her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. A drop of water flowed out from the corner of her eyes. "I still have classes tomorrow? You're suspended from classes tomorrow?" The man bit down on her neck, his voice extremely hoarse. "Suspended? What's suspended? How did you know? I didn't even hear about it. As an investor of T University's library, I've directly given you the title of an honorary principal. If I say that classes will be suspended tomorrow, who dares to not do so?" Jinwan, tomorrow was the weekend, and it was true that there were only a few classes and Professor Lin's class that would occasionally have supplementary classes. Even if classes were suspended for a day, it would not have much of an impact. However, she never expected that the man who had always been so calm in the company would actually have such a domineering side for the sake of his own selfishness. If she did not feed him tonight, it was possible that T University would have to suspend classes for an entire week starting tomorrow. Jinwan was slightly distracted. Mo Jingshan suddenly placed his hand on the back of her head, placing a gentle and light kiss on her forehead. He kissed her hair while his other fingers slowly inched inwards inch by inch, causing Jinwan's trembling whimper. Jinwan's suppressed voice was as soft as a kitten's. Each sound crashed into his eardrums, grinding against the restraints he had forced out in order to allow her to adapt as quickly as possible. Chapter 237. The light in the living room became ambiguous. Jinwan could barely hold it in. He looked at her, his low chuckle causing her ears to turn red. He pressed against her waist, pressing against her slightly. Even through her clothes she could feel the heat. She shrank back from the pressure. Afraid that she would fall, she held onto his shoulder, pressing against him even more. Mo Jingshin seemed to be able to completely control her nerves. Jinwan's waist softened. She wanted to close her legs but could only whimper against his neck because of this position. It was as though she was instinctively yearning for more, but also as though she was faintly resisting this surging tide of passion. Seeing her like this, Mo Jingshin could no longer hold it in and was about to press her back onto the table. He was just about to move when a voice abruptly rang by his ear. Jinwan's phone rang. She immediately struggled. Phone. Mo Jingshin furrowed his brows. Ignore it. As he spoke, his fingertips pressed deeper. Jinwan bit down on her voice and pushed his hand away. It's getting late. It's either because there's something urgent in the studio in High City or because there might be something at school. If Professor Lin has something important to inform me, it won't be good if I miss it. Mo Jingshin glanced at her. It was clear that he did not intend to let her go. However, Jinwan immediately tensed up in his arms. If he did not let her answer the phone now, his temper that had just calmed down would most likely surge again. He finally released some of his strength. Jinwan wanted to get up from his body, but her legs were too weak to move. She looked awkwardly at the phone on the sofa. Go and get it for me. Sitting on him, she ordered him around, taking advantage of the fact that she had been seduced by him. Mo Jingshin did not say anything more. He held her waist with one hand and brought her up, while the other went to the sofa to pick up the phone. Jinwan's whole body was still soft. She lay on him until the man sat on the sofa with her in his arms. She leaned over and was about to hide, but he didn't let go at all. As he handed the phone to her, he still let her sit on his lap and signaled her to take it with his eyes. Jinwan was helpless. Without looking at the caller ID, she put the phone to her ear. Hello. The little woman in his arms had just been stimulated, and her eyes were watery. Her lips had also been kissed until they were dark red, and her chest was faintly discernible. Her long, undried hair was tangled around her body like seaweed. What a vixen. Mo Jingshin's Adam's apple bobbed. He decided to close his eyes and place his hand on his brow. He leaned against the sofa and patiently waited for her to finish her call. His lower body was tightly pressed against hers, and the hardness that could not be ignored was pressed against her through the fabric. Jinwan did not dare to move. Ling Feifei's questioning voice abruptly came through the phone. Jinwan, why didn't you and Feng Ling return to the dormitory today? Although Jinwan and Ling Feifei did not have a good relationship, she never had to explain her whereabouts to anyone. For Ling Feifei to suddenly call to question her in the middle of the night, Jinwan instinctively felt that it was strange. I'm outside, what's wrong? Is something the matter? Jinwan patiently asked. It's nothing much. It's just that a diamond watch I bought before coming to T-City has disappeared. A few days ago it was still in the dormitory. Yesterday it suddenly disappeared. I originally wanted to ask if you guys saw it, but in the past 2 days, you and Feng Ling coincidentally didn't come back to stay. I can't help but be suspicious. So, when are you guys coming back? Ling Feifei's tone was unkind. Jinwan was extremely annoyed with people like Ling Feifei. There was not a single day where she could rest. How could there be so many problems? What diamond watch? She had never even seen one before. Could it be that she had been unhappy for a while and was thinking of ways to frame someone and create more trouble? She was quiet for a moment before coldly saying, Do I look like I'd be interested in a diamond watch that's worth at most 100,000, or would Feng Ling be interested in something that's embedded with diamonds? Wouldn't you call the police if you lost something? Calling me, are you hoping to find it in my cabinet or bag? Don't you think your motive is too deliberate? The person on the other side of the phone seemed to choke from her precise words. After several seconds of silence, she abruptly reprimanded, In any case, there are only these few people in the dormitory. Usually no one comes in. So what if you can afford to buy a gown that's worth $1 million? What if that's all your savings? I've seen people who borrow money to act cool, let alone someone like you. Who knows if you're using all your money to act cool? My watch is lost, but where are you and Feng Ling right now? Even if I want to call the police, I have to call you suspects back. Otherwise, if you guys escape, where am I going to find you? Crazy. It's none of your business when I go back, but you have to remember that both my and Feng Ling's cabinets have a separate password lock, and the number of times it can be opened is limited. When the password lock is opened, the connected phone software will also record it. Once my and Feng Ling's cabinets have been opened in the past few days and what was put in them, the police may find out. Are you sure you want to play such childish tricks? The person on the other side of the phone fell silent. Just as Jin Wan was about to hang up, he angrily hung up first. Why were there always people in this world who liked to find trouble? Did their brains grow under their feet, or did they think they were too scheming and could easily be pinched like a bun? However, Jin Wan was not in the mood to consider whether he was stupid or not. She threw her phone back on the sofa and put her hands on the man's chest. Her legs were still a little weak. She was about to jump out of his arms when she had just calmed down, but the man abruptly pressed her back down. What call did you pick up? Mo Jingshan clearly saw the impatience and disgust in Jin Wan's eyes. It was rare to see her show such obvious dislike towards someone. A lunatic in the dormitory. I don't know if she has persecutory delusions or likes to mindlessly make her presence known. Ignore her. I can't be bothered to mention such a person. Jin Wan had just answered when she felt the man's body pressing closer and closer. Jin Wan's emotions and feelings that had slightly moved away were instantly pulled back by his action. She watched as he held her waist with one hand and unbuttoned his clothes with the other. The buttons of his shirt were unbuttoned by him single-handedly. This visual effect was truly indescribably seductive. Especially the man's gaze, which was very deep and dark. Are you really not going to return to the bedroom? Earlier, he clearly waited for her to answer the phone. Chapter 238. I'll go back in a bit. The man had yet to finish speaking when Jin Wan's leg was abruptly held by him. Her vision suddenly spun as she was pressed against the sofa by the man. She raised her eyes to meet the man's dark and deep eyes. In an instant she actually began to stutter. You, control yourself, ah. However, before she could finish her words, the man had already grabbed her ankle, which was forced up by this position, and abruptly pounced on her. He held her chin and kissed her face. Jin Wan's hair was messy and her face was flushed. She was so charming that it was indescribable. Soft moans escaped from her mouth. It was as though she was enjoying it, but at the same time, it was as though she was being tortured. She subconsciously clenched the sofa beneath her. The man bent down to kiss her sweaty face. His voice was tight and hoarse as he pressed against her soft lips, asking vaguely, "Did you miss me?" Right now, Jin Wan could no longer understand what he was referring to. Are you still going to throw a tantrum with me in the future? How can I guarantee that my emotions will always be at the same level? It can't be that I won't even allow you to throw a tantrum. You can throw a tantrum, but you can't throw a tantrum, especially when it's related to misunderstandings. If you can clear it up, then clear it up. You're not allowed to lock yourself in the room again, and you're not allowed to let your imagination run wild. At such a time, the man was shockingly calm. Although his voice was hoarse, he slammed against the sofa even harder, causing Jin Wan's mind to go blank. She was completely unable to hear what he was saying. Mo Jingshan controlled his temper and asked hoarsely again, "Are you still going to lock yourself in the room and not come out?" This time Jin Wan roughly heard it clearly. She opened her eyes slightly and looked at the man above her. His eyes were like the surging waves of the boundless ocean. They were heavy and focused on her body. Jin Wan looked at his gaze and felt as though she was about to drown. Her heart beat wildly. "And sorry?" Jin Wan felt that she really wasn't rational enough at that time. Previously she was stubborn and wanted to save her face. Right now, even that bit of temper that she shouldn't have was gone. He bent down and pressed his lips against hers. It was a very light, delicate and gentle kiss. The sensations beneath her grew more intense with each layer, almost drowning her. Jin Wan raised her arms and wrapped them around the man's neck with some difficulty. She pressed her burning face against his chin, her voice tender and soft with hints of naturalness and tenderness. "I love you." Mo Jingshan's movements did not stop. In fact, he became even more ferocious and intense than before. When he heard these two words, he looked at her and his ink-black gaze deepened. He suddenly kissed her again, stealing away her breath. Jin Wan. After starving for so long, she knew that she could not help. Jin Wan didn't know which of her words had agitated him, but those two words suddenly spilled out of her mouth based on her feelings. Afterward, she almost forgot what she had said to him, but this night she was tormented from inside out by this man. In the end, when she was so stimulated that she almost lost her voice from crying, the man abruptly bit her lips, swallowed her hoarse voice and pressed her firmly into his arms. The next morning, Mo Jingshan's biological clock was earlier and more punctual than Jin Wan's. Although Jin Wan slept soundly in his arms, when the man rose, she still felt something. However, she was too tired to open her eyes. The man who had just gotten up gently lifted the quilt and got up so as not to wake her up. He seemed to have been watching her for a long time. The two of them had been together for a long time. Even if Jin Wan didn't open her eyes, she could feel the man's gaze on her face. He was very focused and did not move away for a long time. Just when she was half asleep and considering whether she should get up directly, the man kissed her on the face and got out of bed. This sense of security allowed Jin Wan's tired heart to regain its footing. She hugged the blanket and turned over to continue sleeping. It was already past 8 o'clock when he finished showering, changed his clothes, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for her. When he returned to the bedroom, the woman on the bed had already sat up, but she still had a sleepy expression on her face. Her hair was messy and scattered behind her shoulders, and she was wearing the nightgown he had helped her change into last night after taking a shower. Jin Wan really did not have enough sleep. Last night, this man was really too cruel and inhumane. However, right now she was indeed hungry. She smelled the scent of breakfast, and it was even made by Great Boss Missouri himself. Just the smell alone was enough to entice her to wake up. Mo Jingshan casually buttoned his sleeves, walking toward the bed with his long legs. "You're awake? Get up and wash up. Have breakfast." Jin Wan raised her sleepy eyes. "Can I come back to sleep for a while after breakfast?" When she raised her eyes, she saw that the man had already finished washing up. His black shirt was different from the white one from yesterday, but it was still incomparably handsome. His well-dressed appearance made it hard for one to associate him with the energetic and unrestrained beast from last night. He was as clean and handsome as ever, perfect to the point of being impeccable. "Get up and eat first. After eating, walk around the room to digest before sleeping. Otherwise you'll get indigestion." The man most likely knew how bad he was last night and did not force her to get up. He said in a heavy voice, "The breakfast is still warm. Do you want to wait until it's cold before eating?" Jin Wan rushed to remove the blankets. The soreness between her legs was too obvious. She stood up and changed her posture several times before finally finding a more comfortable position to walk out. "Classes are really suspended today?" When she walked to the dining table, she saw the long-awaited Mo Jingshan breakfast. She yawned as she reluctantly went to wash up. She could only eat after washing up. "And classes are suspended, so you can continue sleeping at home. There's no need to worry about whether you'll miss Professor Lin's class." The man placed the cutlery on the table. Jin Wan stood in the bathroom to brush her teeth. There was clearly a bathroom in the bedroom. Although she had seen this side of Mo Jingshan before, it was truly rare. She really wanted to see it, so she stood there and brushed her teeth while watching the man's back view under the morning sun. After washing up, they sat down to eat. Mo Jingshan understood her appetite very well. He made just enough food for 2 people. However, after eating with him, Jin Wan did not move from her seat. She looked at the man who was about to take the dishes to the dishwasher and raised her face to say, "I'm not full yet. I want to eat another bowl of noodles. A small bowl is fine too." Chapter 239. Jin Wan was clearly acting coquettishly, even her tone was soft. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. "Are you sure?" Jin Wan nodded. "I'm sure." If Mo Jingshan's memory was correct, the amount of food she ate for breakfast was just right. However, from her expression, it seemed like she was not full yet. "What kind of noodles do you want to eat?" "Anything is fine as long as you cook it." "Are you sure you can still eat?" "And?" He did not ask further. "Wait, I'll go cook." Jin Wan was really not purposely acting coquettishly. After being tormented by the man for an entire night, it was only right for her to ask for some interest. Furthermore, her appetite had increased significantly recently. Although her weight did not increase and she was still as thin as before, every bowl of Mo Jingshan's breakfast made of love counted. After all, it was something that could only be chanced upon. 3 days later. "Jin Wan, it's been several days since you've returned to the dormitory. You mustn't be late for Professor Lin's morning class today. I heard from Professor Lin that the person who invested in T University's library has officially become our school's honorary principal. This morning, there will be a meeting with the school leaders in front of all the teachers and students. The honorary principal should also say a few words. I'm not sure what the situation will be like today, but right now the students around me are all very excited. You must remember not to be late. Bai Wei kept urging her over the phone. Jinwan, I understand. I'll be there soon. Hurry up, you can't be absent today. All right. I'll be there soon. Jinwan hung up the phone while glancing at the so-called T University's newly appointed honorary principal, who was resting with his eyes closed in the back of the car. Bai Wei's call was naturally to remind her not to be absent. After all, the MO Corporation's status in the country was not simple. For the business and enterprise management students, to have the opportunity to interact with the rumored CEO MO was indeed a grand event that they could not miss. You'll be going to T University today? She looked at the man and asked with some hesitation. Mo Jingshan glanced at her and reached out to pull her in. He kissed her face and warmly said, I was strongly requested by your school leader to speak a few words. I'm not interested in such an occasion, but since I've already given T University so much face for you, I'll do my best to see it through to the end. And that's right. After all, since Mo Jingshan had agreed to invest in T University, he wasn't joking. No matter what, he had already shouldered the responsibility for this matter. Besides, he was already an investor on the board of directors and an honorary principal. If he didn't give T University any face, he would basically be treating the school leaders like playthings. Jinwan could see that Mo Jingshan was considerate and polite to the managers of the education industry, so she wouldn't embarrass them too much. At this time, the driver was driving and Jinwan and Mo Jingshan were in the back row. Mo Jingshan didn't let go of her after hugging her, nor did he let her go back to her seat. When he passed by a traffic light intersection, his phone rang. When they reached a traffic light, his Mo said. He answered the call. After crossing the intersection, they had already arrived at T University. Jinwan saw that she was going to be late. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was on the phone, she did not waste any time. She threw him a glance, nodded politely at the driver and got out of the car. Mo Jingshan listened to the call. A moment later he was quiet and indifferent. Where are they now? Hearing the reply, Mo Jingshan's gaze was calm and unruffled. I got it. Jinwan thought he was going to have a meeting. In the end, all the teachers and students entered T University's largest stadium at the same time. The 7,000 to 8,000 students were all seated. She did not expect there to be such a big crowd. As expected, no matter how low-key Mo Jingshan was, his status was still there. If someone wanted to invite him to say a few words, they did not dare to put on a show for fear of being neglected. But there were too many people. T University Stadium had a capacity of around 15,000 people. Right now, half of the seats were filled with students. The other half was covered by a curtain, and only this half was open. Because they were basking in Professor Lin's light, the students in his class were all seated in the first 3 rows. They could clearly see the person on the stage. Behind them, several students were discussing in low voices. I wonder what the legendary CEO Mo looks like. I heard he's very handsome. Haven't you seen CEO Mo's photo? He's already very handsome. Do you have a photo of him? I haven't been able to find it. Most of the photos I've found on the internet are from his side profile or from a blurry angle taken by business reporters. I've never seen his face, but just his side profile is already very mesmerizing. I reckon he's super handsome. He has to be super handsome. Do you think that Hai Cheng's 2 male gods, Nanqin and Bei Mo, are just rumors? Then hurry and show me the photo. I don't have any either. It's only from his side profile, but I've studied every angle. It's enough to confirm that CEO Mo is a 360-degree man with no blind spots. He's so handsome that it's suffocating. They were still whispering to each other, but Jinwan glanced at the school leaders on the stage and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. In fact, there were times when a student's world was very simple. Although she did not like it when her man was stared at by various women who drooled over him, right now she really felt as though she was sitting among her husband's fangirls. Even Bai Wei, who was usually calm and collected, was clearly filled with strong anticipation as she sat by Jinwan's side. There was no need to mention Ling Feifei, who sat by the side. Her eyes were about to pierce through the curtains, wanting to drill in to see if the legendary CEO Mo had arrived. T-City could not be compared to High City. No matter what, the people here did not interact much with the Mo Corporation. Even in High City, there was basically no chance of meeting Mo Jingshan. However, at the very least, the people there had a good understanding of the Mo Corporation's background. Although Mo Jingshan had many fangirls, most of the unmarried young ladies in High City had already seen through reality. They knew that this man was unattainable. Although there were still a few weirdos who persisted in finding trouble with Jinwan, they were basically negligible existences. Seeing that the school leaders were still speaking, everyone sat quietly and chatted for a while before feeling bored. They did not know when CEO Mo would come out. After watching for a while, Bai Wei also turned toward Ling Feifei. She casually asked, "You said you lost that diamond watch for several days. Have you found it?" "Not yet." When Ling Feifei answered, her gaze suddenly seemed to inadvertently shift toward Jinwan. Jinwan, on the other hand, calmly and coldly looked back at her, meeting her gaze. Only then did Ling Feifei quickly turn away, no longer meeting her gaze. Chapter 240. At this moment, the lights in the stadium suddenly dimmed. The school leaders on the stage used an extremely solemn tone to welcome the honorary principal. After the thunderous applause, there was a moment of silence. No one dared to make a sound. He was clearly her husband, but at this moment, Jinwan actually felt a little nervous under such an atmosphere. This was the first time she had seen Mo Jingshan in such an occasion. She did not know what kind of serious and cold role he would play here today. When Mo Jingshan's figure finally appeared on the stage, almost all the young ladies below the stage sucked in a breath. The man who was eagerly invited onto the stage by several school leaders was already standing on the podium on the right side of the stage. In front of him was the podium, behind him was a large screen with T University's logo against a blue sky. On the screen were soaring white clouds. Mo Jingshan was wearing a white shirt, but it was not swallowed by the white on the screen. Instead, it was especially eye-catching. He was not as Jinwan had imagined. She had thought that he would be dressed in a strict and cold black suit today. She had thought that he would use the most decisive and ruthless methods to catch people off guard in certain important meetings. She had thought that with the title of honorary principal, he would wear a suit and tie like the other school leaders and even hold a microphone in his hand with a solemn expression. But he did not. He was dressed casually in a shirt and trousers. It did not seem deliberate at all. One of the expensive and exquisite buttons on his collar was casually undone, and his sleeves were rolled up to his forearms. Although Mo Jingshan was in a high position, he was still the youngest and most outstanding person in the country's upper class. With his own ability, he had built up the Mo Corporation in just a few years. Furthermore, with his own strategies and means, he had squeezed into the highest position in the country's business world. He was a business god whose net worth was unattainable by countless people. Furthermore, behind him stood the Mo family and America's Shine Group, which were both extremely important. Everything related to Mo Jingshan was a vast number of figures and the country's unfathomable domestic business system. Yet, his appearance at this moment was extremely casual and indifferent. "Oh my God, so handsome." Around them, soft sighs of admiration could be heard. Some people were even discussing Mo Jingshan's age. Some said that Mo Jingshan appeared to be around the same age as most of the male students in T University, while others said that a man like Mo Jingshan, who was at the peak of his career, should be at least 30 years old and only looked young. Right now, Jinwan was the only one who knew the exact answer. Most university graduates were around 23 years old. Mo Jingshan was only 3 years older than them. Many of the students present were those who had been held back or re-enrolled. They were around the same age as him, but they were still under the school's management. Their appearances and experiences were simple and ordinary. Even the school hunks of T University's female students paled in comparison to him. However, the man on the stage was very low-key and simple even today. The man was so clean that he didn't even need to do any styling. Under the stage lights, his deep, pitch-black brows and eyes were beautiful and distinct. It was completely indescribable with words. Such a man couldn't be replicated by anyone. This man stood there, only a faint smile, but in an instant, other than him, the sun and moon lost their light. "Everyone, this is the first time we've met." Mo Jingshan stood behind the podium that was commonly seen in schools. He held the microphone on it, one hand casually resting on the podium while the other gently raised the microphone. His pale lips carried 3 parts of a smile and 7 parts of calmness and indifference. The man's tone was casual and not deliberate at all. It was as if he was not invited to speak, but as if he was facing a group of young people who had yet to officially step into society. He put down his identity and gave everyone a simple smile in a polite and approachable manner. He said, "I'm Mo Jingshan." With just this sentence, the audience immediately applauded thunderously. Jinwan also rushed to applaud. However, looking at the man who was the center of attention on the stage, Looking at his otherworldly calm and indifference, looking at this well-dressed man, she inexplicably recalled the scene last night when she was pressed down on the bed by him. She really couldn't see any trace of him being fierce to her in bed for the past few nights. What kind of man was he exactly? He could calmly control the overall situation in the company. The life and death of many small and medium-sized enterprises and many business strategies were in his hands. He clearly had a pair of hands that could move clouds and rain with one turn of the hand. Yet, he was very close to Nan Heng, a person who had a complicated background and was wandering on the fringes of the foreign arms business. Furthermore, he could stand here with the title of T University's honorary principal. I'm very grateful to all the students of T University for coming here and having a pleasant and simple meeting with me. Everyone below the stage was quiet. The boys looked up at the man standing at the top, each of them thinking about whether they would one day have such an achievement. The girls looked up at the man, but at the same time, they were also tempted and drooling. As everyone knows, T University is the most high-end institution of higher learning in the country. It nurtures numerous talents for the country's economy and various large enterprises. From now on, MO Corporation will not only invest in the reconstruction of T University's century-old library, but we have also reached an agreement with T University to choose T University as our first choice in the future's recruitment fairs. At this point, Mo Jingshan's smiling gaze shifted to Jin Wan, who was sitting in the third row in front of him. Jin Wan's position was not particularly obvious, but the man's gaze had already landed on her face. In the gymnasium that held several thousand people, everyone was looking seriously at the man on the stage. However, because of his gaze, the solemn crowd suddenly began to whisper among themselves. They were all asking what was CEO Mo looking at. Which direction was he looking at? The school leaders also subconsciously looked in that direction because of his gaze. However, the lights on the stage were too dim. They could not make out the students' faces and could not tell who he was looking at. While everyone was curious, Mo Jingshan calmly withdrew his gaze. He unhurriedly curved his lips into a perfect curve and raised his hand to indicate for everyone to stay focused. In an instant, Jin Wan's heart that had been raised to her throat slowly calmed down. Chapter 241. His actions immediately attracted everyone's attention. They were originally wondering who CEO Mo was looking at earlier, but now they had all raised their heads to stare unwaveringly at him. Jin Wan was suddenly very nervous. Previously, she had clearly said that she did not want to expose anything in these few months at T University. However, Mo Jingshan's earlier glance was really too dangerous. Ling Feifei, who was seated by Jin Wan's side, already felt her heart churning. She recalled that earlier CEO Mo seemed to be looking at her. Ling Feifei wondered if CEO Mo was looking at her earlier. She shyly raised her hand to press against her cheeks. She was so agitated that her hands were trembling. The students seated here must have grown tired of hearing the so-called official words in your more than 10 years of student life. What's more, you're tired of listening to the various polite speeches you've long memorized. Mo Jingshan's voice was clear and indifferent. Very good. If you're not willing to listen, I'm not willing to speak. The group of students below the stage immediately laughed. Great Boss Mo's words had really struck straight at their hearts. I'm a businessman and I travel the business world. In the past 2 years, I've indeed been invited by several local business universities to be a visiting professor in the management department or business department. However, I've rejected them all. I really don't have the time or energy. Teaching and educating people is a noble profession. An executioner like me who has mingled in a bloody business world is not suitable for it. Everyone below the stage held their breaths to listen. This is T University. The majority of those seated here are aiming for the business department. In the future, a large portion of you will also be involved in the business world. The reason why I use the words bloody business is naturally not to frighten you. You'll be learning all sorts of knowledge here. I don't need to elaborate on what you're all aiming for by enrolling here. After all, T University's full name has the word business behind it. This isn't a playground but a military camp for war preparations outside of the battlefield. Since I've already been given the title of an honorary principal, I should be mainly encouraging you. However, as I've said earlier, you've heard enough official words. Mo Jingshan's tone changed and his faint smile abruptly disappeared. This is the reserve base for domestic business talents. Everyone has a dream, but if it's so easy to reach your dreams, you wouldn't have gone through so many trials and gone through so many difficulties to obtain a letter of acceptance. Do you think that just because you've entered T University, there will already be famous companies waving at you? Do you think that just because you've entered T University, you'll naturally be able to inherit your family's business? Mo Jingshan chuckled. You're wrong. To enter this place you have to put in 10 times the effort. Furthermore, this is just the beginning. The laughter of the girls below the stage gradually died down, and the light in the eyes of the boys also changed a little. Do you think you can spread your wings and soar after graduating? He laughed again. In the big melting pot of the shopping mall where people kill without spilling blood, only 1 out of 100 people can stand. No one below the stage was laughing anymore. What do you want to do here? Aside from learning basic skills, you also need to train your heart. In this short period of time, there are already some who are destined to be eliminated. If you don't want to be eliminated, start working hard today. At least it's better than being chased off the stage. You'll be able to grasp the tail of opportunity better. This was a psychological attack. After all, the students who were able to enter T University all thought of themselves as very capable and proud. There were also many business students who had their eyes on the top of their heads and thought that they were unparalleled in the world. Only this kind of psychological attack would be able to get them to listen. It was also the most effective type. Initially, the school leaders were scared witless, thinking that CEO Mo was here to tear them down. However, after listening to the end, they finally put on smiles of admiration and joy. Amidst the silence, only Jinwan smiled. To be able to speak so patiently to a group of students, she had truly witnessed another side of Mo Jingshan. She did not laugh out loud, nor was it very sudden. However, Mo Jingshan's gaze suddenly landed on her face. The faint smile on the man's lips did not diminish, but the color of his eyes deepened. After pausing for a moment, he smiled slightly and aimed at the microphone, asking clearly, "The female student in the 3rd row, 5 seats away from Professor Lin, can you tell me why are you smiling?" Jinwan, translator, Henyi Translations editor. Henyi Translations. In the silent stadium, the thousands of students immediately turned their gazes to the direction of the 3rd row, searching for the person 5 seats away from Professor Lin. The people in the back row couldn't see clearly, and the people in the front row couldn't see clearly because the lights were too dim. Only those closest to Jinwan were able to accurately direct their gazes toward Jinwan's face. Amidst the silence, Jinwan watched the smiling man on the stage. He was smiling, but in her heart she was gritting her teeth. He did it on purpose. Thus, intentionally. This speech was indeed not very official. From the initial blow to the final uplifting speech, it was truly fascinating. When Mo Jingshan placed the microphone down and turned to leave the stage, there were still many students who wished for him to continue speaking. The school leaders once again began to speak about various official pleasantries. After another half an hour they finally ended. The students all rushed out of the stadium. Jinwan was originally about to leave with everyone when Ling Feifei suddenly turned back. Her sharp eyes caught sight of Mo Jingshan, who was currently speaking with the school leaders behind the curtains. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had not left, she abruptly and quietly turned back by herself. Bai Wei saw Ling Feifei's stealthy and sneaky movements and turned to look at her. At the same time, she also noticed the scene behind the curtains. "Ai Jinwan," Bai Wei softly called out to Jinwan, gently tapping her arm. "Jinwan, what is it? Look behind you." Bai Wei lowered her voice. Jinwan raised her brows and turned back. After taking a glance, she understood. These few days she's lost her diamond watch and stirred up other things. Clearly, she's trying to find fault with you and Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't come today, so I'm afraid she'll take advantage of the fact that the school leaders are here to say something about you. She's really too unreliable. She can easily splash dirty water on others. Come, let's follow her to take a look. Bai Wei held Jinwan's hand and turned to head back. Jinwan did not mind this. Ling Feifei's brainless actions were not worth her concern. However, seeing that Ling Feifei was clearly heading in Mo Jingshan's direction, she did not reject and turned back with Bai Wei. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.